Hi, I'm a lady who works as a cook. I recently got married, and I'm really enjoying being a newlywed. I usually keep my past to myself and don't talk much about it. I don't have many friends, but I tell people I grew up like any other kid, even though it wasn't that simple. I had a tough childhood, but I was lucky to have my grandpa who loved me a lot. He was like my only family because I didn't have parents around. My grandpa worked hard, sometimes at construction sites or collecting and selling things like paper or fruits and veggies. I don't have baby photos because we couldn't afford them, but when I turned 6, my grandpa made sure I had a picture taken every year on my birthday to capture my growth. I didn't go to kindergarten, but my grandpa taught me basics like the alphabet and numbers. My grandpa didn't have much money, but he was well respected in our neighborhood. The neighbors would pitch in to help take care of me because they knew my grandpa was working hard to raise me. This meant I got to have warm meals and play with the older kids in the neighborhood, who taught me a lot of things. When my grandpa finished work, he'd come get me. Our house was small and old, with just one bedroom, a kitchen, and a bathroom. It could get pretty uncomfortable in the extremes of weather, but we managed okay. In the summer, my grandpa fixed up an old fan he found, and in the winter, he washed and reused old blankets to keep me warm. He did everything he could to take care of me, even though we didn't have much. Our neighbors were also struggling, but they still helped us a lot. They came to school with me on my first day, took turns attending parent-teacher meetings at my grandpa's request, and even packed food for my school trips as a way to say thank you for his hard work. My grandpa was a handyman who could fix just about anything around the house. In our friendly neighborhood, people helped each other out with their skills, but gossip still circulated. Some folks couldn't help but wonder why my grandpa was raising me alone in such tough circumstances. He never really talked about my parents when I was growing up. Whenever I asked, he'd just say they had passed away soon after I was born and were now in heaven. When I was younger, I thought they had died from some serious illness like cancer. But as I got older, I started hearing different stories, mainly from the women in the neighborhood. They'd whisper about how my grandpa had never been married and how nobody had ever seen my mom or dad. It was confusing because my grandpa had always told me they were my real parents. And if I had parents, shouldn't I have had a grandma too? It didn't add up. As I listened to her, I realized something strange. We didn't have any family photos of my parents, not even one of my grandma. Our photo album only contained pictures that my grandpa insisted we take every year, along with some snapshots our neighbors had taken of us. When I reached middle school and started going through puberty, I began to rebel a bit, questioning my identity more and more. Living only with my grandpa made it even harder. I had so many questions about my parents, and by 9th grade, I couldn't hold them in any longer. I sat my grandpa down and bombarded him with questions, desperate for answers about where my mom and dad were, whether they were alive or dead, and why there were no photos of them or my grandma. I felt like I was interrogating him like a criminal, but I needed to know. As I got emotional and started crying, my grandpa just held me close and reassured me. He explained that my parents couldn't raise me, so they left me with him when I was a baby, hoping to come back for me someday. He showed me a small bracelet they had left behind, saying it was with me when I was born in the hospital. Seeing that bracelet, some of my curiosity eased. Even though I learned that my parents had abandoned me, knowing that my grandpa loved me and raised me with care was enough. From that day on, I started to find some peace within myself. I began to see a way out of the challenges of puberty. College wasn't an option for me due to our financial situation, and I didn't want to add to my grandpa's burdens, so I made up my mind about my career before even starting high school. "Grandpa," I said, "I want to be a cook. I plan to take career classes during my senior year, earn my cooking license, and find a job right after graduation." My grandpa asked if I was sure I didn't want to go to college, offering to do whatever it took to save up for tuition. I reassured him that cooking was my passion and that I wanted to set things up so he wouldn't feel guilty about it. True to my word, once I reached my senior year of high school, I dove into cooking classes and earned several licenses. I secured a job a month before graduation and received my first paycheck just a week after. With it, I bought some steak to celebrate, though I couldn't afford to dine out. Back home, I surprised my grandpa with the steak and handed him an envelope containing some of my earnings. "This is for you, Grandpa," I said. "It's what's left after buying the steaks." My grandpa was speechless. "Patty," he finally said, "I can't accept this. You worked hard for this money. You should use it for yourself. I can't possibly take it." He insisted, pushing the envelope back toward me. "Grandpa, if you don't take it, I'll leave home. Why should you be the only one doing things for me? I really wanted to give you this money," I threatened, feeling a surge of frustration. Eventually, my grandpa relented, tears welling up as he accepted the envelope. He tucked it into a book he enjoyed reading. Sharing that steak meal in the place I'd always called home felt incredibly special. For the first time in my life, I felt proud to do something for my grandpa. We chatted happily as we ate, until a knock interrupted us. Who could be knocking at this hour? My grandpa wondered aloud as I went to answer the door. To our surprise, 2 police officers stood there. "Is Richard O'Leary here?" they asked, and I confirmed that he was my grandpa. "And you must be Patty Rowland?" they inquired, and I affirmed that too. "Both of you need to come with us to the police station," they stated matter-of-factly. When I asked why, they informed us, "Mr. O'Leary is being accused of kidnapping a child. You both need to come with us." I was stunned. Kidnapping? I couldn't fathom why my grandpa was being accused of such a heinous crime. I protested that he wasn't that kind of person, but the police insisted we accompany them. That night, my grandpa and I found ourselves in a police car headed to the station. Despite the gravity of the situation, my grandpa remained oddly calm. We waited in a designated area until eventually, the police returned with some other individuals accompanying them. A woman in her 50s entered the room, accompanied by a couple holding hands. She approached us, pointing accusingly at my grandpa. "That's him. He's the one who kidnapped the president's daughter." She exclaimed loudly, shocked and confused. I demanded answers. "What do you mean? Who did my grandpa supposedly kidnap?" I shouted back at her. The police intervened, trying to calm both the woman and me down. Behind the shouting woman, the couple stepped forward, and the woman addressed me with tears in her eyes. "Are you Patty?" she asked, and I awkwardly nodded in response. Suddenly, she embraced me and burst into tears. "Patty, it's Mom. I'm your mother." Her words hit me like a bolt from the blue. I was stunned and bewildered, but my grandpa's composed demeanor added to my confusion. He stood up calmly and addressed her. "So, you finally returned. Only now. Are you okay?" The woman in her 50s scoffed, accusing my grandpa of kidnapping. I vehemently protested his innocence, while the couple watched on, clearly perplexed. The woman in her 50s went on to explain that a couple had visited her orphanage, claiming they had left their baby there and had now returned to reclaim their child. They left behind a letter stating their intention to return for the child, along with hospital paperwork. I was about 3 or 4 at the time. However, despite searching through records and adoption papers, we found nothing about the child. Then, a distant memory surfaced. There was a child who went missing years ago, causing a major commotion. Despite reporting to the police and filing missing child reports, she was never found. I recalled an old man who used to work at the orphanage abruptly quitting around that time. He had been overly attentive to the children, and I had considered firing him before he vanished. Could he have been involved in kidnapping a child from the orphanage, leaving behind a distraught woman? We underwent DNA testing as my grandpa calmly observed the couple. He asked the police, "Are they truly Patty's parents?" The police insisted we wait for the results. Then, my grandpa pleaded with the officers, offering to stay in jail if necessary, but asking for the chance to tell his side of the story. Grasping the officer's hands, he began to speak. The police acknowledged his right to defend himself. Grandpa agreed to share his story once the DNA confirmed the couple's parentage. Reluctantly, the police consulted the couple, who agreed to the arrangement if it meant hearing the truth. While awaiting the DNA results, my grandpa remained at home under recognizance, and I continued my routine going to and from work. 2 days later, the DNA results came in, showing a 99.99% match. After 20 years, I finally met my parents. Hearing the news, I was overcome with a strange mix of emotions. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably, but my parents embraced me, soothing my sobs. The orphanage director glared at my grandpa with fury, as if she could kill him on the spot. "Now you must arrest this old man for kidnapping. Were you planning to ruin my establishment?" She raged, her anger palpable. True to his word, my grandpa began his tale, producing a stack of papers from home and presenting them to the police one by one. "It's true that I worked as a janitor at the orphanage, not far from where I live now," he began. "One morning, I arrived early to find a young child sleeping outside the orphanage, curled up in a ball. I assumed she had been abandoned by her parents. Concerned for her well-being, I tried to bring her inside, but she woke up and, with her black eyes, called me Grandpa." Grandpa continued, explaining how the child handed him a bag containing a doll, paperwork, and a letter promising to return for their daughter. "I took her into the orphanage, where she began to live," he recounted. "While cleaning, I often saw the child, but she always seemed to have a dark expression. It wasn't until about a month later that I discovered the reason. The woman was abusing her, especially when the orphanage faced financial strain due to overcrowding. Another child had arrived, and she took out her frustration on this poor girl." Grandpa described how the child was forced to do arduous chores, her hands red and bleeding from the harsh treatment. "I confronted the director multiple times, urging her to stop mistreating the child," he continued. "But instead of listening, she fired me. As I was leaving, I couldn't bear to see the child so unhappy. That's why I did what I did," my grandpa explained, his voice tinged with remorse. He recounted how he had taken me in after witnessing the neglect and abuse I suffered under the orphanage director's care. "The director didn't even bother to read the documents in the bag," he continued, neglecting her duties and subjecting me to abuse. "That's why I took Patty in, to protect her and raise her as my own granddaughter." After his revelation, the police and I were left in a state of uncertainty. The orphanage director, however, remained defiant, accusing my grandpa of fabricating stories to tarnish her reputation. "I'll sue you for slander," she threatened, her voice dripping with venom. The police pressed my grandpa for evidence to support his claims. With confidence, he mentioned a former employee, Mrs. Cumberland, who could attest to the abuse. While we awaited Mrs. Cumberland's testimony, I was speechless, grappling with the truth unfolding before me. In the late afternoon, Mrs. Cumberland arrived at the police station, armed with photographs she had taken of my injured hands and other signs of abuse. My parents, upon seeing the evidence, were overcome with emotion. The undeniable proof left the orphanage director cornered, and my parents wasted no time in announcing their intention to sue her for her crimes. Despite her pleas for forgiveness, she was arrested and charged with child abuse. That night, my grandpa and I returned home, the weight of the day's revelations heavy on our minds. From my parents, I learned the heartbreaking truth. They had left me at the orphanage due to financial hardship, hoping to reclaim me once they were stable. When they finally returned, they discovered I was missing and unregistered. Only recently did they learn of the possibility that my grandpa had taken me in. Although their actions couldn't be excused, my parents found solace in the fact that they had finally found me after years of searching. They faced repercussions for abandoning me, but now they sought to alleviate their guilt. I harbored no resentment toward my parents. I was simply eager and anxious to finally meet them. Nor did I hold any blame toward my grandpa, who had saved me and showered me with love and care during my time with him. His unwavering support was the reason I couldn't hate my parents. I assured them that I understood their circumstances and expressed gratitude for their efforts to find me. As my mom hugged me, tears streaming down her face, she knelt before my grandpa. Without him, I wouldn't have had such a wonderful upbringing, she acknowledged. Despite his protests, my parents insisted on taking care of him and urged us to live together as one family. Eventually, we moved in with my parents, but the adjustment wasn't easy, as we had spent more time apart than together. Eventually, my parents arranged for a separate house for my grandpa and me next to theirs, allowing us to live comfortably while still being close to family. After work, we would gather for dinner and watch TV together, just like any other family. After I got married, my parents invited my grandpa to live with us, and we seamlessly merged into one big family. Meanwhile, my parents pursued legal action against the orphanage director, adamant that they couldn't forgive her. During the proceedings, I met my husband, who was working as a prosecutor on the case. He admired my grandpa's selflessness in raising a child who wasn't his own for nearly 2 decades. It made me reflect on whether I could have done the same in his shoes. I hold my grandpa in the highest regard and wish him a long and healthy life. Thank you all for listening to my story. Your support and comments mean a lot to me. Wishing you all a day filled with happiness and good fortune. I will never forget what my father told me when I announced my engagement. He took me to the side and said, "Zoe, are you sure about marrying this man, Peter? I know you're in love with him, but I don't think he's a good match for you." "Why are you saying this, Dad? He loves me and respects me. I don't care if he's not as well off as us." "I know that, Zoe. You know, I built my riches from nothing. I would never disrespect the person who does not belong to my economic class. But Peter is a very sketchy man, and his mother is no different." "What do you mean, Dad? I don't understand." "Call it a father's instinct, so. This man doesn't love you. Yes, he showers you with affection, but always talks about how rich you are. I heard him flexing to his friends that he bagged the rich brat." Julia just laughed with him and agreed. "You must be mistaken, Dad. Peter would never say those things about me. Julia also loves me a lot. I'm sure she would scold Peter if he tried to joke like that." Sometimes I wish I had listened to my father. He didn't know what he was talking about. I was a stupid girl in love. My mother passed away 2 years before I got married. My dad was sick and wasn't long for this world. I was desperate to hold on to something that would give me the will to live. Peter and Julia became those people. My dad was a rich man. He made a series of good investments that made him very financially well off. I worked hard at my job and got a moderate salary as well. All in all, we were pretty comfortable in life. My husband Peter and his mom Julia weren't that well off. Yes, Peter did earn more than me, but he came from a very humble background. His field wasn't good enough to make him a millionaire. Peter did hold some resentment towards it. He and Julia liked sophisticated and expensive things. He often complained about not having enough money. I was always glad to help them out with the little allowance my dad gave me. I even let Peter and Julia move into my house after marriage, but neither Peter nor Julia were happy with my house. They said, "It's such a shame that you live in a small house. Your dad literally lives in a mansion. How come you bought such a small townhouse?" "I don't earn a lot, Peter. Dad lives in a mansion because he has lots of money. I'm a simple office employee earning a moderate salary. This house was difficult for me to buy as well. Dad helped me out with the down payment." "Well, if he helped you out, he should have got you a better place. I'm sure your mom had left him something to give you when you became older." "I'm not entitled to anything, Julia. Whatever my mom left behind is my dad's now. She died suddenly, so there was no will. I don't mind if I don't get anything. I'm happy with the way things are." "That's a ridiculous thing to say, Zoe. I sure would have loved to inherit a lot of money. You know what? Your dad should trade houses with us. He lives alone, so he doesn't need the space anyway, right, Mom?" "Yeah, Peter's right, Zoe. You can ask." "Absolutely not. That house is my dad's, and he deserves to live comfortably as long as he is alive." "Well, he will be alive for long now that he's sick. We can wait and compromise for a few years and see what happens. Ultimately, everything will be yours after your dad dies. You will have plenty of money to buy a big house and more." The way Julia and Peter were already making plans to spend my inheritance was super disturbing. It also didn't help that they regularly asked me to ask my dad for more money. It's not like we were hurting for cash. Peter and Julia simply wanted the millionaire life, even if they weren't one. Honestly, I was getting tired of their behavior. However, the real drama happened after my father passed away. My dad's cancer took him away from me. Pretty soon, I was devastated but got little support from Peter or Julia. They were only concerned about the date of the will reading and didn't even help with the funeral. Hell, they refused to attend the funeral because my dad was no one to them. I was heartbroken and furious at that point. My dad's words kept coming back to me. I was getting suspicious of them and started to have doubts about their intentions. I was afraid that they were really after my inheritance money. They were not allowed to be in the reading of the will. Peter and Julia said, "Why the hell are we not allowed to read the will? This is ridiculous. Lawrence was my own father-in-law." "Yes, this is ridiculous. We are family and should be present for this event. We have the right to know what Lawrence left in the will. At least my son should be allowed to be there." "Your son is not in the will, Julia, so he cannot read the will. Why are you two so obsessed with inheritance? You didn't even come to the funeral." It was funny how my dad was suddenly family when it came to getting an inheritance. I was pretty annoyed at Julia and Peter. What was worse was that they started to hound me as soon as I got back from reading the will. They were not allowed to see the will. I had a hard time dealing with the grief of losing my father, but I got no words of support or sympathy from them. They simply wanted to know about my inheritance. Julia asked me, "So we have been wondering about something for a while now. How much inheritance did you receive from your parents? You must have got a lot of money. How much money did you get?" "My parents unfortunately didn't leave me any money in my inheritance, so I received zero." "What? You didn't get any money? But your parents were rich. They should have left you something. I don't believe that you didn't get any money. I'm sure you are lying to us all. There is no way your parents didn't leave you a single penny." "No, Peter. There was no money in my inheritance. The will didn't even mention me getting any kind of money. You can check my bank balance in a few days and find out. But what about their riches? Who will get those? You are their only child." "I don't know about that, Julia. The lawyer just told me that I didn't get any money. It's fine by me. It was my parents' money, and it's up to them who they would give it to." "That is ridiculous. You need to fight for the money. It should be yours." "There is no money, Peter. They didn't have much money in the end. Whatever was left was given to charity. They have been planning this for a while now." Julia and Peter looked very pissed by what I said. I had no idea why they were being this weird about my inheritance. I almost told them the full details, but something stopped me from doing it. There was this creeping doubt in my mind that my husband and mother-in-law were up to something. I waited for them to digest the news. When Julia and Peter kept pressuring me for more information, I put my foot down. I told them firmly that I didn't get any money and even offered to show them my account in a few days. Well, a month passed, and nothing showed up. In the meantime, Peter grew very restless and stopped being affectionate with me. He was always checking my account and constantly hounding me for information on my inheritance. I was starting to see where this was going. Finally, one day, I decided to put an end to it. I showed them my bank statements and said, "See, I told you that I didn't receive anything. I'm not hiding any secret inheritance money from you. Do you believe me now?" Wow, our years of hard work just went down the drain then. So his parents weren't rich, and she didn't even get $100 in the will. This is ridiculous. I can't believe this. I can't believe this either, Mom. I stayed in this marriage for nothing. I married Zoe for nothing. It was all a waste of time. What the hell does that mean, Peter? Why are you talking like this? Why do you think he's saying these things, Zoe? Who the hell would marry you without thinking about the money? My son simply married you so that we can bank on your inheritance. Now I see that you didn't even get a penny. I can't believe I wasted 5 freaking years on a useless girl like her. I could have done so much better. I was stunned to hear them speak that way about me. I could finally tell that Peter married me for money. My parents were right about him and his mom. They were freaking gold diggers. I was so freaking done with my husband and mother-in-law. I was breaking inside, but what they said next turned me into stone. Julia looked at Peter solemnly and said, "What is done, Peter. But now it's time for you to divorce Zoe. There is no reason why you should stay with her anymore. You will have time to find a new rich wife. This time, we will make sure she actually has some money to her name." Are you freaking kidding me, Julia? You are asking Peter to divorce me over money. Peter, are you going to listen to her? Of course, I would listen to her, Zoe. I married you so that I and my mom could have a comfortable life. We grew up poor, and I didn't even go to college. I had no way of earning a lot of money. So, you pretended to love me and then tricked me into marrying you. You thought that my parents would give me lots of money that I would readily share with you. Yes, that's what I thought. It was the only way I could give my mom the life she wanted. But now I see that my efforts were in vain. Mom's right. I need to divorce you and keep looking. I was stunned by what Peter said. He said those things so nonchalantly that I started to question my own sanity. Julia and Peter went on to express their frustration at my marriage and myself. I didn't hear a word after a while. I was too busy coming to terms with what they just threw at me. Their total lack of reaction and Peter's sudden shift in behavior were both depressing and angering to me. After a point, I was so mad that I wanted to scream and throw things. However, I didn't do any of that. I calmly said, "Okay then, Peter. If a divorce is what you want, you will get it. I was never the one to say no to your demands. I might as well give in to your demand now as a last favor. So, you will agree to a mutual divorce. It'll save us both a lot of money. By the looks of it, you don't have much to go on anyway. Don't think of this as an opportunity to get alimony from my son. We will fight you tooth and nail before you give up that dream. You better preserve your lawyer fees and agree to a mutual divorce. It'll be best for you." You're right. I don't have a lot of money right now, so I decided something. I will agree to a mutual divorce, but you have to sign a clause saying that we won't share any of our assets with each other. That's not a problem at all. You don't have much, and neither do I at the moment. If you can forego alimony, I'll agree to sign a divorce and won't claim anything from you. Me and Peter discussed the details of the divorce and made sure we were on the same page. I could see that Julia and Peter were both happy about me not making a fuss out of the divorce. I guess they didn't expect me to be so calm about it. Truth be told, ever since that day, I have been crying on my way to and from work. I used to sit in the parking lot of my office and cry for an hour before and after work. Peter never noticed my puffy eyes or even asked why I was leaving early for work and coming home late. Julia didn't even bother looking at me after she discovered that I had no money. All of their behavior just made me even more determined to get out of the marriage as soon as possible. I actually had Peter and Julia move out of my house to a rented space in the neighborhood. They soon settled in while we waited for the divorce to finalize. True to his word, Peter didn't demand a share of my house. I also didn't ask for alimony. In his eyes, it was a fair deal. Well, he had no idea just how far I made things out to be. He came to know about it on the day our divorce was finalized. I went over to his new rented space to drop off my wedding and engagement ring. So, I just wanted to return these to you since the marriage only brought bad times in my life. I don't want to have any memory of it. Are you sure you want to return it? I mean, you might need the money after all. It's so funny, you know so. You must have laughed at our poverty before. Look where you are now. My son is being generous and giving you the rings. You might need to sell them when your stupid job doesn't pay enough. We want Mr. Rings. They're cheap ones anyway. What would I need to sell the rings for, money, Julia? You don't have to be embarrassed. So we already know how your parents didn't leave you anything. I guess they lost everything due to poor financial decisions, leaving their daughter destitute. At that point, I laughed very loudly in her face. Julia looked confused, and so did Peter. I could tell that Peter was somewhat annoyed by his mother's behavior, and he was also surprised at my laughter. Julia said, "Why the hell are you laughing so? Did I say something funny?" "It's freaking funny how you think I'm destitute, Julia. It's also funny that you think my parents lost all their fortune." "Well, of course, you're destitute. Your parents didn't even leave you a penny. They surely messed up and ruined your life by not leaving you an inheritance." "I never said that I didn't get an inheritance, Julia. I simply told you that I didn't get any money. My parents did, in fact, leave me plenty of inheritance." "What the hell does that mean? You have an inheritance." I'm so confused. "My parents could see you and Julia for the little gold diggers you two are. So they made a secret clause in their will. It said that I would receive no monetary inheritance. Instead, I was given this entire neighborhood as my inheritance." "What? You own this neighborhood now. How is that possible?" "We would have known about your inheritance if this was true. We even signed the lease with an estate manager who didn't tell us the name of the owner. My parents wanted me to wait for a year before I got my inheritance. They wanted me to test you too and see if you are really with me for money or love. Well, of course, you failed the test, and now you won't get anything from me. Also, the estate manager was appointed by my parents to take care of the property before I inherited it. They were smart people, you know." "That is impossible. I don't believe a word you're saying. You're just embarrassed because you don't have money anymore." "Oh, really, Peter? Is that what you and your mother have concluded from this? Well, why don't you call your landlord and find out from him? Don't worry, we would do that. Then everyone will see just what a big liar you are." Julia and Peter called their landlord and asked about what I said. Since their landlord was the estate manager, he told them everything. Julia and Peter were stunned. They looked really panicked. After cutting the call, they said, "You lied to us. You tricked us into thinking that you don't have anything, but you own the entire housing society now. How dare you trick us so? You wanted all your riches to yourself, so you tricked Peter into divorcing you and made him sign papers that he wouldn't claim anything from you." I laughed at their audacity to turn this one on me. It was finally dawning on them that they had messed up royally, and now it was time for some sweet karma. I said, "It's funny you accused me of tricking you too, Peter. You tricked me into marrying you by telling me that you love me. Julia, you helped your son in this plan, and you were the one to tell him to divorce me. If anyone here was being a scammer, it was you two. As for my inheritance, you asked me how much money I got, and I answered truthfully. This was all a misunderstanding. So, what happened is in the past. Why don't we just try again in the new light? We did spend 4 years together. It would be a shame to throw it away. So now you want me back in your life. Funny how you were desperate to start afresh with a new girl. I hear that you are already seeing someone rich. Don't worry, I'll inform her about what a snake you are." Peter and Julia started to beg me not to mess up this new relationship. Peter told me that since I wasn't ready to give him another chance, I shouldn't mess up his future. I told him to freak off. Also, I informed them that I will kick them out once the property is transferred to my name. They panicked at that and started to beg me even more. In the weeks that followed, Julia and Peter showed up at my house to beg me to forgive them. Peter and Julia already have an eviction on their record, so it is unlikely anyone would give them rent. The only reason they were staying on my property was that I asked the estate manager to allow it. I also called Peter's new victim and told her everything. She was horrified by what Peter and Julia did and broke up with him instantly. She even showed me the texts. After this fiasco, Peter and Julia beat down my daughter, called me names. I promptly called the police and had them off my property. After I got my inheritance in my name, I kicked them out very swiftly. They didn't expect me to go through with the threat. They did show up on my property again, and the police were called. The cops gave them a stern warning, and I filed for a restraining order. Turns out the entire town knew about what happened. They were essentially disowned by friends and had to leave the city to start afresh. Meanwhile, I'm enjoying my new wealth and am finally free from gold-digging leeches.
Hello, I'm Patricia, 48 years old, and I live with my husband Ethan and my mother-in-law in a well-connected suburb close to the train station, which provides excellent access to the city center. During our house hunting phase, Ethan, who had just been promoted to a managerial position, insisted on finding the spacious apartment, even though it came with a high rent. He believed the extra space was worth the cost. Ethan is 6 years older than me and was introduced to me by a mutual friend after his divorce. His mature, comforting presence quickly became something I relied on. After 3 years of dating, we decided to get married. When I revealed my struggles with infertility due to a past illness, his affection remained unwavering. My feelings for him only grew stronger even after learning about his previous marriage and his son Willie from that relationship. "I'm truly sorry to ask you to live with my parents and son," Ethan had said. "I promise I won't let you suffer. I'll ensure you're happy and give you space so you don't feel suffocated." He suggested moving into a large apartment where I could have my own room. Willie turning 9 that year wouldn't require much care, especially with his grandmother around to help. After his divorce, Ethan's parents had supported him with childcare till his father tragically passed away in an accident, leaving his mother to take over as Willie's caretaker. From our very first meeting, Willie barely made eye contact with me. Initially, I attributed his reserved demeanor to his age and possible shyness, so I didn't let it bother me too much. As long as the family accepted me, I felt content to be part of their household. My mother-in-law, a woman of quiet elegance, treated me with kindness during our formal introduction post-engagement, which gave me hope that we could coexist peacefully. She set clear expectations from the start. I'll continue to prepare the meals as usual. Ethan often comes home late, so it's fine if we eat at different times, right, Patricia? I'll leave the cleaning and laundry to you. Let's work well together, she said. After we married, I transitioned from full-time to part-time work at the pharmacy to better manage the household chores. This new schedule meant I wouldn't get home until nearly 9:05 p.m., but at least dinner was always ready, a small comfort during my solo dining routine. My mother-in-law and Willie typically ate before I arrived, which reinforced a sense of isolation even within my married life. At first, I wondered if this was all there was to family life, but I gradually accepted it as our way. Despite our seemingly smooth start, it became evident that my mother-in-law never truly accepted me or considered me part of the family. In my attempts to bond with Willie, I asked about his school activities. "Willie, when is the school's activity day before summer? We're all going to see you, aren't we?" Before he could answer, my mother-in-law quickly intervened, saying, "We'll go, just Ethan and me. Patricia, you don't need to worry about it." Misunderstanding her intentions, I persisted, "I can take the day off work. Let's all go together." But she dismissed me sharply. "You don't need to do that. You're Ethan's wife and family has always just been Ethan and me." Her words stunned me. That night, I expressed my shock to Ethan, who explained, "Mom has been clinging to Willie. She probably thinks you're trying to take him away. I'll talk to her about it over time." I managed to attend the activity day, hoping to integrate into the family as a mother figure. However, Willie and I rarely interacted outside of these school events. Sometimes I sensed he wanted to open up, but my mother-in-law consistently interjected, blocking any progress. I later discovered she had been tarnishing my image in Willie's eyes, suggesting that I would be happier if he weren't in the picture. This revelation deeply hurt me, highlighting the complexities and challenges of blending into a family with pre-existing bonds and hidden resentments. The accusations were harsh. "She's a terrible person. Dad must be deceived by her too." Hearing such negative comments from my mother-in-law must have influenced Willie during his impressionable teenage years, explaining why he grew distant from me. The situation was disheartening. I had never imagined she could be so manipulative. By the time Willie graduated from high school, he was eager to leave home. He moved in with his girlfriend immediately and departed for college soon after. Within a year of starting his career, he married her quietly and simply, without any formal ceremony. Once Willie was gone, my mother-in-law's behavior took a turn for the worse. Surprisingly, she stopped all housework, which had been a regular part of her daily routine. It seemed her new pastime was finding fault with me. She stopped cooking, something she had previously taken pride in, and would sit at the dining table waiting for me to return from work. The moment I stepped into the kitchen to prepare a meal, the criticisms began. "You're so inefficient. At this rate, it'll take you all night," she scoffed. I admitted I wasn't skilled at cooking, mainly because I had relied on her for meals. Whenever I did manage to cook, she critiqued every dish relentlessly. "This tastes awful," she would say, grimacing. "I'm sorry, I'm trying my best," I would respond, only to hear her retort, "You're astonishingly tone deaf when it comes to flavors, Patricia. It's a good thing Willie never had to eat this." If she disliked it so much, I thought, why didn't she just cook herself? It seemed her goal was merely to berate me. Her complaints weren't limited to my cooking. She began to nitpick everything I did, from chores I wasn't accustomed to handling to laundry. "Why are there so many wrinkles in the laundry? You have to vacuum every nook and cranny. You really can't do anything right. Didn't your family teach you anything?" These jabs at my upbringing were especially painful. She would sigh disdainfully and say, "I don't know how you won over Ethan, but I can't see much charm in you as a woman." She always concluded with the same hurtful line, "If you hadn't come along, Willie would have never left." I realized her heart was aching from Willie's absence. Perhaps it was a case of empty nest syndrome. I told myself that if venting her frustrations on me helped her cope, I should just bear it. However, her antagonism intensified after a particular event: the announcement of Willie's wife, Teresa, being pregnant. The joy she displayed was unlike anything I had seen before. "It's Will's baby. It's bound to be adorable. He'll be my first grandchild," she exclaimed with genuine happiness, watching their elation. Despite the ongoing challenges at home, I found a small piece of joy for myself. My mother-in-law's excitement over the impending arrival of her great-grandchild was nothing short of overwhelming. The catalyst for her exuberance came when Willie asked if his wife, Teresa, could have their baby at our place, given that her family lived an hour away and they lacked local support. Thrilled to be needed, my mother-in-law immediately agreed to help. Joy palpable. Willie's calls became a daily occurrence, each one sending her excitement soaring even higher. She dove into preparations with fervor, clearing out Willie's old room, organizing the space for the baby, and meticulously planning everything from nursery decor to essential baby supplies. The moment I got home from work, she enlisted my help. "Patricia, I've taken care of the vacuuming in Willie's room. Could you handle wiping down the floors and the windows? And make sure to wax them too," she instructed, her tone urgent. "This weekend, we're off to buy a crib," she added, as if it were the most natural plan for our weekend. Juggling these tasks late into the night after my shifts was grueling, and any attempt to shortcut the process was met with a stern command to start over. Before long, her requests extended to finances. "Patricia, I need you to withdraw some money tomorrow. There are a few more things I want to pick up for the baby," she declared one morning. I hesitated, concerned by the rapid pace of spending. Shouldn't we wait for Teresa and Willie to arrive before we buy so much? Maybe Teresa would like to choose some things herself, I suggested, hoping to inject some practicality into the frenzy. Her response was sharp and dismissive. "How can you be so detached? It's Ethan's grandchild, after all. Oh, but of course, you're not related by blood. You wouldn't understand, would you?" The accusation stung, and I tried to clarify my position gently. "It's not that I don't care. I just thought it might be nice for Teresa to have a say in her own child's preparations," I explained. But my attempt to reason with her seemed to hit a nerve. She shot me a piercing glare, and I realized I may have crossed the line. I watched helplessly as she turned and retreated to her room, deeply upset. That night, I reflected on our harsh exchange, feeling the weight of her words. The following morning, she stayed in her room, likely still angry about our conversation. Ethan was about to leave on a business trip when he paused at her door to make a final remark. "I'm heading out. Don't dampen Mom's enthusiasm about the grandchild. She's been different since Willie moved out. You've noticed it too, right?" I nodded but added, "However, if we use up all our funds now, what will we do when Willie and Teresa need our help?" Ethan frowned, misunderstanding my concern. "Are you suggesting?" "I don't make enough money," Ethan said, but I quickly reassured him. That's not it at all. However, it was too late. He left visibly upset, leaving me alone to ponder the delicate balance of family dynamics and financial responsibility. As the one managing our household finances for over 12 years, I considered it prudent to think ahead. Ethan had always reassured me that my part-time income was for my own use, so I diligently saved whatever I didn't spend, viewing it as a shared resource for our future. However, the financial stability of our household had been steadily deteriorating over the past 4 years. Ethan's salary had shrunk to a third of what it was when we first got married due to his company's declining performance. Despite the uncertainty about the company's future and his job security until retirement, Ethan was reluctant to seek new employment, unwilling to relinquish his role as department head, primarily to maintain appearances in front of my mother-in-law. As a result, I took on the responsibility of paying our rent while he managed other living expenses. We kept this arrangement hidden from my mother-in-law to preserve Ethan's dignity. One day, feeling the weight of recent tensions, I decided to leave work early to apologize to my mother-in-law. When I arrived home, she was already seated at the dining table, waiting for me. "I'm sorry about yesterday. I may have been too harsh," I began, but she interrupted me with an icy demeanor. "Willie and Teresa are coming back to have their baby here. I need you to move out," she stated bluntly. Stunned, I barely managed to ask, "I have to leave?" She confirmed, "Yes, we don't need another mother figure. You've been redundant for a while now. Willie and his family will be living here. Make sure you're out by tomorrow." Her words hit me like a freight train. I had never felt fully accepted by the family. I had always been the outsider. Now, with Willie's return for the birth, it was clear I was a failure. "You were allowed to experience raising a child. Be grateful for that. We have no obligation to support you anymore. It seems Ethan is tired of you too. Maybe he's getting along well with a new girlfriend by now." Shocked and heartbroken, I grabbed my bag and left the house, wandering aimlessly to calm my shaken spirit. I tried calling Ethan, but despite my mother-in-law's insinuations, he didn't answer, no matter how many times I dialed. I even called his office, only to find out he had taken a few days off. The suspicions seeded by my mother-in-law started to seem more plausible. Overwhelmed with emotion and tears streaming down my face, I found myself in front of the pub near the station, a place Ethan and I used to frequent when we first moved here. It still stood as a relic of happier times. As I entered, the owner's face clouded with concern before he recognized me. "Hey, long time no see." "It's been about 6 years," I replied, trying to muster a smile despite my distress. "Yes, it's been a while. I remember you," he said, offering a nod of recognition that brought a brief sense of relief. "Can I get a beer and a mixed plate of charbroiled chicken?" I asked for a small comfort in this familiar place, a refuge from the storm swirling through my life. As I settled into the pub, I engaged in light conversation with the owner, a man of few words, while sipping my cold beer and savoring the charbroiled chicken. Pulling out my cell phone, I lit up the screen to reveal a photo of Ethan and me taken on Willie's 17th birthday. He looked dashing in the slim suit we had chosen together, and I found myself wishing for a closer family bond. The beer seemed to wash away the day's troubles, and as I contemplated my next steps, I browsed for moving companies, discovering one available for the next day. I bookmarked a couple of junk removal services, saving their contacts in my favorites, and changed my screensaver to something less personal. A sense of mental clarity began to return, and the meal tasted exceptionally good. Perhaps a small comfort amid the chaos. I decided to give the situation more thought once I was back home. As I walked away from the pub, a young waitress hurried towards me. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Patricia?" she asked. Having noted my previous screensaver, she hesitated, then dropped a bombshell. She believed my husband was having an affair with one of their employees. We exchanged contact details, and she promised to keep me updated. Suddenly, the pieces began to fit together, validating the harsh words of my mother-in-law. Instead of feeling sad, a fierce anger surged within me. It was time to confront this head-on. That evening, I contacted the moving company and resolved to leave the next day. If there was no conspiracy and my mother-in-law and Willie were indeed plotting against me, I no longer felt obliged to maintain appearances. I packed my belongings relentlessly until midnight. The movers arrived promptly the next morning, and I instructed them to take everything I had purchased. I was determined to erase any trace of my presence. My mother-in-law was taken aback by my resolve. "I'm taking everything I bought. You can start fresh tomorrow," I declared. "I'm taking everything I bought," I declared, barely suppressing a laugh at her protests. The movers efficiently cleared out my belongings, leaving behind only the baby gear and her old dresser, the remnants of a life before I arrived. "Well then, I bid you farewell. There shouldn't be a trace of me left, so enjoy your new life with Ethan, Willie, and his family," I said coolly, leaving her stunned as I placed the keys on the table and exited the house, the movers trailing behind with my possessions. I decided to stay with a colleague temporarily, feeling a sense of completion and relief wash over me. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in months. 2 weeks later, Ethan finally reached out, his voice tinged with confusion and urgency. Patricia, where are you? Willie and his family are here. Aren't you coming home soon? No, I'm not coming back, I replied firmly, recalling his mother's command for me to leave. Meanwhile, the young waitress from the pub had kept her promise, sending me a photo of Ethan chatting intimately with another woman at the pub and later entering a hotel with her. This betrayal erased any remaining affection I had for him. Armed with evidence of the affair, I was ready to confront the situation fully. No longer bound by illusions of my old life, I had had enough. I didn't hesitate to make it clear to Ethan over the phone. Willie and his family are moving in with you, right? I figured as much. I heard they've been struggling financially, bouncing between part-time jobs since Willie graduated from vocational school. I want you back, Patricia, Ethan replied, desperation lacing his voice. I went to the pharmacy and they said you were taking some time off. Yeah, I needed a break, I said nonchalantly. But I'm fine, so don't worry about me. Your mom and Willie probably prefer having the house to themselves without me around. My blunt remark left Ethan speechless. He knew all too well that his mother and Willie had never accepted me, but he chose to ignore it. All right, I need to talk, so I'll come back there, he said, a plea evident in his tone. A few days later, I returned to the house for the first time since leaving. Inside, I noticed new furniture and appliances. Willie and Teresa barely acknowledged my presence, nodding from their seats on the sofa without standing. As I sat down, my mother-in-law glared at me with a mix of shock and disdain, the atmosphere thick with tension. Before I could rush my visit and leave, Willie confronted me. What are you doing here? You took everything from the house. What kind of monster does that? Dad's been supporting you and you've had it easy. I exhaled deeply, frustration boiling over. I took everything because I paid for it. I was clearing out all traces of myself, just as you all wanted, right? That's crazy. There's no way you could afford all that, just working part-time at the pharmacy, Willie shot back. Turning to face Ethan, I replied firmly, we've been getting by on what both Ethan and I earn. And for your information, Ethan's company hasn't been doing well. His salary has dropped significantly. For the past 4 years, I've been the one covering the shortfall. I've been paying our rent. My mother-in-law's face registered shock as she turned to look at Ethan, who awkwardly avoided her gaze. I'm not just a part-timer. I'm a druggist, and the pay is quite good. I make more than Ethan now. The room went silent, the tension palpable. I turned to Willie. I decided it was time to face some hard truths. Since you're going to live here now, it's time for you to start taking responsibility. You'll be paying the rent to help your grandmother. Willie's face twisted in surprise. Rent? How much is it? It's $7,200, I stated firmly. Good luck, because it seems my role here is over. I have no obligation to take care of you anymore. You're going to be a father soon, Willie. It's time to pull yourself together. Teresa, overhearing our conversation, suddenly spoke up, panic evident in her voice. Wait, $7,200? Weren't we supposed to live here for free? I stood ready to leave, satisfied that I had made my point clear. Covering rent and living expenses is just part of life. Good luck figuring it out. As I walked out, leaving them to absorb this new reality, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The chapter of my life filled with neglect and ingratitude was finally closing. I almost burst out laughing at the absurdity of the situation but managed to keep my composure. Don't worry, Teresa. There are cheaper places available. Ethan still makes a decent salary after all, I remarked, watching her face relax slightly. Then, with a heavy dose of sarcasm, I added, oh, and since I'll be leaving, life might get tough for you, Ethan, especially with your mistress. At that, Teresa's composure shattered, and she dissolved into tears. What are you talking about? My husband stammered, looking panicked. Through her tears, Teresa responded, oh, your mother told me about the new woman. I guess it's time to end my role as a wife too. Ethan looked flustered. My mother said what? He sputtered, realizing too late that I knew far more than he wished I did. It hasn't even been 6 days since I left the house. Ethan, wouldn't that hurt Grace if she knew? I mused aloud. At the mention of Grace's name, Ethan's face went pale, confirming my suspicions. This isn't the right atmosphere to discuss divorce papers, but I'll be in touch about that later, I declared, standing up to leave. Neither Ethan nor Willie could find the words to respond. They remained silent as I grabbed my bag. However, my mother-in-law abruptly stood up, slamming her hands on the table and yelling with surprising vigor for her age, "What the hell? It's all your fault. Our home is in shambles." I shot back without hesitation. "It was you who told me to leave, you who hinted at Ethan's affair, and you who interfered with my relationship with Willie. Everything is because of you." A rush of anger surged through me, and I regretted not being more assertive in my relationship with Willie and not standing up to her sooner. "Willie has nothing to do with this, Ethan. It's time for you to step up. You're going through a hard time. You should support him as his wife and take responsibility as a family member," I admonished. "What is she even talking about?" My mother-in-law muttered, bewildered. If she hadn't called Willie back home, if she hadn't hinted at Ethan's affair, I would still be supporting Ethan in this home. "Where are you, Willie? Why are you still here?" "It's all her fault," my mother-in-law concluded, her lips pressed tightly together, trembling with emotion. I slipped past her and quickly left the room. Afterward, Ethan agreed to the divorce rather easily. My determination and the undeniable evidence of the affair left him no other choice. Shortly after, it seemed they began the process of moving out of the apartment. In the end, Willie and Teresa returned to their own apartment, opting not to live with my mother-in-law. Ethan appeared to be considering remarriage, but Grace was furious over the alimony and his request for her to live with his mother. I heard they were now deliberating their next steps after everything that transpired. My mother-in-law eventually ended up in a care facility. It's somewhat melancholy to reflect on the irony of her situation. After all the dedication she poured into raising her son and caring for her grandson, it seems they are now ready to move on without her. Perhaps, in their eyes, she had fulfilled her role. If my mother-in-law had held her tongue back then, and if it had merely been a simple return home for childbirth, maybe we could have continued living together even after the divorce. But things unfolded differently. Willie sent me an apology letter recently. In it, he expressed his childhood longing for more affection and explained that he couldn't talk to me freely because his grandmother disapproved. He also shared how pleased he was whenever I attended his school events. Reading his words, I wondered if I should have made more effort to connect with him. Maybe then our relationship could have taken a different path. Despite the end of our familial ties, I find myself silently hoping for Willie's happiness in life. As for me, I've returned to my job as a druggist and rented an apartment close to my workplace. I didn't feel right keeping the furniture and appliances I had taken from the house, so I arranged for a junk removal service to take them away. Life without the constant criticism and interference of my mother-in-law has turned out to be peaceful and comfortable. For now, I am focused on living for my own happiness, no longer beholden to fulfilling someone else's expectations or desires. It's a new chapter, one where I can finally breathe freely and look forward to what comes next. While dining at an upscale restaurant, I found myself in an unexpectedly tense confrontation with my mother-in-law. She glanced at me dismissively, smirking with a wave of her hand, her contempt unmistakable. Frustration simmered within me, but I kept my composure. "Are you asking me to leave?" I asked, my voice steady despite the anger just beneath the surface. I was ready to walk out when she abruptly interjected, "Wait a minute. If you leave now, who will pay the bill? Hand over the money." Her tone was both arrogant and commanding. I responded with a calm smile. "Why should I pay for someone who's practically a stranger to me? My name is Emma. I'm 31 years old and I work in an office. My husband James and I usually have a harmonious life together, but his mother's intrusive and domineering behavior is a constant strain. Living nearby, she often drops by our home uninvited, always ready to critique from my cooking, which she claims isn't good enough for her son, to my housekeeping, which she deems inadequate. Despite knowing I work full-time, she often criticizes me for not keeping a perfect home, especially when she visits in the evenings. What's more frustrating is that she portrays a different persona around James, making it hard for him to see her true nature. He remains oblivious, believing her behavior to be harmless since he's never witnessed her harshness firsthand. The situation escalated further when she acquired a key to her house, courtesy of James, making it almost impossible to set the boundaries I desperately needed. She frequently uses this key to enter our home whenever she pleases, often to criticize my cooking or cleaning and to disparage me to our neighbors. It's become one issue after another with her. I've repeatedly told James that I'd prefer us to move further away, but he's been so focused on a major project at work that my concerns often go unnoticed. Then, unexpectedly, things began to shift. James received a promotion due to the success of his project, increasing our income and finally allowing him to consider a move. With this new financial stability, he's even started talking about the idea of starting a family, making me hopeful that we might finally establish the boundaries I've been longing for. I agreed, but I made it clear, if we were going to raise children, we needed a more family-friendly environment. Our current area lacked safe play spaces and had limited daycare options. After much discussion, my husband finally agreed that moving was the right choice. This decision brought me more joy than his promotion. However, my happiness was short-lived. The next day, my mother-in-law arrived unannounced, as usual, which immediately irked me, bracing myself for her criticisms. But this visit was different. She seemed excited and wanted to celebrate her son's promotion by inviting him to a lavish restaurant known for its exquisite cuisine and exceptional service. "That sounds nice, good for you," I replied, trying to remain polite. "You're still not very friendly," she remarked, then continued, "Anyway, I want you to come with us. Please join us." I tried to keep my options open without committing. "I'll see if I can, but it might not work out," I replied. "Don't say that. We want you to come," she insisted, brushing aside my hesitation. Her sudden eagerness for me to join, despite frequently excluding me from family outings, left me both puzzled and cautiously hopeful that maybe this could mark a shift in our relationship. Later, I brought it up with my husband. He explained that he'd already agreed to accompany her and that she'd taken the initiative to book the restaurant for all of us. "You're excited about this, right, Emma?" he asked with a hopeful tone. I decided to be honest. "Actually, I'm not. I'm worried about the expense at such an upscale place. Maybe you could let them know I'm busy and just go without me." "Why are you being so negative?" he replied, disappointed. "It's not just us. My brothers and their wives will be there too. It would be strange if you didn't come and celebrate with everyone." His enthusiasm was clear, but it felt like he wasn't really listening to my concerns. It was as though he was siding with his mother's wishes over mine. If that was the case, I had a backup plan. I had purchased a small voice recorder online to discreetly capture any unkind remarks she might make during the evening. If she acted out, I'd play it back for my husband to help him understand the situation. If he still took her side after that, it might be time to reassess our relationship. Though this decision gave me some peace, the idea of joining them at the restaurant felt daunting, and I couldn't help but sigh at the thought. Additionally, I barely knew my husband's brothers, making the prospect even more unsettling. I had only briefly met my husband's brothers and their wives at our wedding, and our interactions had been limited to polite hellos. When we arrived at the restaurant, a waiter led us to a spacious room where my mother-in-law, one of my husband's brothers and his wife, along with another brother and his wife, were already seated. The table was elegantly set, creating an atmosphere for what was meant to be a celebratory dinner. However, confusion arose when my husband noticed there was only one empty chair at the table. He looked puzzled, wondering if there had been a mistake with the seating arrangement. "Did the waiter mess up?" "I'll go check," he said before leaving the room. As soon as he stepped out, everyone at the table began to eat, and that's when my mother-in-law turned to me with a harsh glare. "There's no seat for you. Why would I invite someone who just married into our family to this celebration? Here's your choice. Do you want to be part of our family, or do you want to leave and never come back? What's it going to be?" Without a moment's hesitation, I replied firmly, "No, I'm leaving." My mother-in-law seemed momentarily taken aback, as if she had expected me to beg for her acceptance. Instead, she threw out another challenge. "Listen, if you pay for everyone's meal here, I'll accept you as part of James's family. You must be upset about being treated like a stranger, so pay up and become family." I had already made my decision. "I told you I'm leaving. Why should I pay for someone else's family meal?" I shot back, stating to leave. In response, my mother-in-law slammed her hand on the table, shouting, "Don't you understand? I'm trying to make you part of the family. Are you okay with being the stranger? Pay up. No, I'm fine being a stranger, and since I am one, I'm not paying for your meal. Goodbye. I walked away swiftly, but she tried to catch up to me. By the time she reached the door of the room, I was already at the exit. Once home, I considered emailing my husband about the incident when he returned just 15 minutes later. The reservation was correct, and my mom is causing a scene, he explained after learning the truth from his brother. I heard everything from my brother. I'm sorry you had to go through that, he added, his tone filled with concern. You came back quickly, I remarked, relieved but still distressed by the events. It seemed like she would have caused a scene whether you stayed or left. How could I sit with them after they insulted you? He replied, his understanding of the situation reassuring me. This confrontation seemed to have a ripple effect. It appeared to awaken a realization among my husband's brother's wives who had previously felt they had to silently endure such treatment. Inspired by my stand against my mother-in-law's attitude, they too began to assert themselves. Soon after, they left the restaurant with their husbands. Predictably, my mother-in-law didn't take this well. Within hours, my phone began ringing incessantly with her calls. Despite my attempts to ignore them, the constant ringing forced me to block her number. Unfortunately, the quiet didn't last long. I received a call from an unknown number, and the voice on the other end introduced himself as a police officer from a nearby station. Hi, sorry for calling so late. Is this Emma's phone? He asked. He then explained that after everyone had left the restaurant, my mother-in-law had attempted to dine alone but insisted that I should cover the bill. When the restaurant staff refused her request to defer payment, believing I wouldn't return after my angry departure, she found herself in a difficult situation. The restaurant suggested she pay with a card, but she had neither a credit card nor enough cash to cover the costs of everyone's meals. After trying to reach out to other family members for help, her frustration escalated quickly. She began yelling, blaming me for her predicament, and in her rage, she started damaging the restaurant's property, including expensive vases and flower pots. This commotion led the staff to call the police. Despite the officers' attempts to calm her down, she insisted on her innocence and continued her tirade. Now the restaurant faced not only an unpaid bill but also the aftermath of my mother-in-law's outbursts. They requested that someone take her home. Feeling somewhat responsible after hearing the officer's account, my husband and I reluctantly headed back to the restaurant. Upon our arrival, we found the police still trying to soothe my mother-in-law. With her arms crossed, she glared at me and burst out, "You're useless. This happened because you didn't pay the bill. It's only right to help your mother. Pay up now." I was stunned by her audacity, especially in the presence of law enforcement. The officer then informed us that if no one was willing to take her home, they would have to detain her for causing a disturbance and damaging property. The situation had spiraled far beyond a simple family disagreement, highlighting the severe consequences of her unchecked behavior. Faced with the prospect of the police either driving her to her house or arresting her for not settling the restaurant bill, I firmly replied, "Take her away. Arrest her or whatever. Just make her take responsibility." My mother-in-law looked at me in disbelief. "How can you say something so heartless? I can't believe it. Just pay the bill. It's not good to have a family member arrested," she pleaded. "I don't care. I'm not family, and I don't want to be around someone who acts crazy and causes trouble," I retorted, ready to leave the restaurant and let the authorities handle the situation. My husband, who had remained silent until now, gave me a stern look. "I know what happened to Emma was wrong, but is it worth getting arrested over?" he asked. "That's not the point," I replied, exasperated. "She's in trouble because she didn't pay the bill and caused a scene. It has nothing to do with me. Are you saying it's my fault for not paying for 5 people's meals when I didn't even eat?" My husband didn't respond but walked past me to speak with the police and restaurant staff. I sensed what he was about to do, and in a last-ditch effort to assert my stance, I prepared to voice my thoughts once more. I called out to him, "If you pay for her meal and bail her out, we're getting divorced. Think about that." However, he continued without a word, pulling out his wallet. Defeated, I sighed and left the restaurant. I walked home, packed my things, and prepared to leave. Just before the day ended, my husband returned looking worn out. "Mom's not getting arrested. It turns out she was wrong. The restaurant agreed to forgive her if I came back and promised she wouldn't return," he explained. I hadn't brought enough money, so I called my brothers for help. As he recounted the details of his day, I remained unmoved. barely reacting to his words. Noticing the bags I was packing, he asked, bewildered, "What's with the bags?" "I'm getting ready to leave because we're getting divorced. I told you if you took her side, we'd get divorced." "You can't pretend you didn't hear me," I said firmly, packing my things while he looked on in surprise. Then he raised his voice. "What's going on? You've been acting weird all day. I know Mom did something bad, but why do we have to get divorced? I already told you I'm being mistreated. Even when you see proof and hear others talk about it, you still choose your almost arrested mom over me. Is it weird that I want to divorce someone like that? I've had enough." Exhausted from having to defend my decision yet again, I packed faster, determined to leave. My husband continued to speak, his voice filled with confusion and distress, not fully grasping the depth of the rift between us. Having resolved to move on from our tumultuous relationship, I quickly prepared to leave and gather the necessary paperwork for a divorce. The next morning, I signed the divorce papers. Though my husband was reluctant to end our marriage, he ultimately signed them too when faced with the prospect of legal action. I submitted them without delay, finally ready to embrace my independence. Soon after our separation, my husband moved out and returned to his parents' home. Having relied on me for most household chores, he struggled to maintain a tidy living space. Frustrated by the mess, he decided to cancel his apartment lease and move back in with his parents. His brothers followed suit after he reached out for financial assistance to repay the restaurant bill. This led to significant conflicts with their wives, who protested that they shouldn't have to pay for a debacle they hadn't caused. The brothers, siding with their mother, used their own money to help without consulting their spouses, deepening the rift and leading to accusations of being unreasonable and fears of legal consequences. Their dismissive attitudes toward their wives caused rapid deterioration in their marriages. Facing similar disputes, the brothers too returned to their parents' home, lamenting their struggles to manage their households. This entire saga turned my mother-in-law and her sons into the talk of the neighborhood. Rumors spread that the brothers had been abandoned by their wives. My mother-in-law dismissed such talk as nonsense and tried to paint us as ungrateful and undutiful. The estranged husbands echoed her sentiments, smugly blaming the failed marriages on their wives while feeling confident that divorcing was the right choice. Fortunately, I had maintained strong relationships with my neighbors who saw through these narratives. My mother-in-law gained an unfavorable reputation for her poor parenting, having failed to instill proper values or independence in her sons. Meanwhile, the husbands were now seen as mama's boys, notorious for prioritizing their mother over their spouses. This entire situation highlighted the underlying issues within the family and reinforced the community's perception of the true dynamics at play. Despite attempts from my exasperated mother-in-law and the husbands to reconnect, I had already changed my contact information and relocated to a new area, effectively disappearing from their radar. They likely continued to grumble about losing contact, but for me, the absence of my mother-in-law's stressful presence is a tremendous relief. In this new chapter of my life, making new friends has been incredibly transformative. During the process of my divorce, I forged strong bonds with the ex-wives of my husband's brothers. United by our mutual frustrations with the matriarch of their family, we found solace and camaraderie in each other's company. Now we frequently spend time together, enjoying meals out, shopping, and relaxing on weekends. Interestingly, I might owe a nod of gratitude to my ex-husband for inadvertently introducing me to such wonderful people. It feels liberating to pursue our interests without interference. The simplicity of this newfound freedom is refreshing, allowing us to live our lives on our own terms, far removed from the negative influences of people like my former mother-in-law. I'm immensely thankful for these friendships. Without this supportive group, I might still be navigating solitude, but they have brought joy and companionship into my life, and I'm hopeful that our bonds will last a lifetime.
Life in the urban sprawl as a police officer doesn't just toughen you, it encases you in a shell of skepticism so thick it might as well be Kevlar. That was me, Emma, a 37-year-old former lieutenant turned private detective. I carried a suitcase of mistrust heavier than the cases I cracked, my daily grind orbiting around unfaithful partners and the art of deception, hardly the backdrop for a romantic tale. Then Bobby strolled into my life, a beacon of modern artistry. refreshing my world like a vibrant brushstroke on a faded mural. We crossed paths at an art exhibition in Philadelphia, surrounded by enthusiasts tossing around terms like postmodern and avant-garde with effortless poise. I, however, felt as out of place as a fish trying to pedal a bicycle. Intriguing piece, isn't it? Bobby said, his gaze fixed on what looked like a strategically arranged heap of junk. If by intriguing, you mean I've seen tidier trash heaps, then absolutely, I quipped. His laugh, deep and resonant, turned heads. That laugh, and the man it belonged to, swept me into a whirlwind romance. Fast forward 7 months, and I was utterly smitten. Bobby was a dapper gentleman who seemed plucked from a bygone era, charming me with poetry readings, exquisite art shows, and an attention that made me feel like the only woman alive. Beneath a starlit sky in Central Park, he proposed. My yes came without hesitation, my heart pounding with sheer joy. The engagement was blissful, a haze of love and daydreams about a future brimming with laughter, adventure, and maybe children, but as the saying goes, if something seems too good to be true. Enter Marilyn, Bobby's mother, the epitome of frostiness. She scrutinized me with the air of someone inspecting a blemish on fine china. A detective? Isn't that a tad unladylike? She asked during our first dinner together. That depends on which century your ideals are anchored in, I replied, earning a tense smile from Bobby. Her visits grew more frequent, each one an audit of our burgeoning life together. 3 weeks into our marriage, she appeared unannounced one chilly Tuesday evening. Her disdain was as palpable as the cold outside. Emma, darling, she began, her voice dripping with condescension, still clinging to that quaint little job of yours? I had hoped marriage would refine you into a proper lady. I was slicing vegetables for dinner, the knife suddenly tempting for uses beyond the culinary. Marilyn, where I come from, we call this earning a living. You might try it sometime instead of leeching off others, I said, my voice steady. Her lips pursed, but she maintained her poised demeanor. Bobby was raised with certain expectations. Emma, there's still time for you to choose a more respectable career. Something like full-time meddling? I shot back, my tone sharp. Thanks, but I'll stick to tracking unfaithful spouses and deceivers. Speaking of which, how's your bridge club treating you? Bobby entered just then, his impeccable timing diffusing the tension, though his arrival didn't stop Marilyn's passive-aggressive commentary. Your wife has quite the flair for sharp remarks, she said sweetly. Mom, Bobby sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Emma's career is part of who she is. Can we not do this right now? I swallowed my irritation and turned back to the chopping board, letting the argument simmer with the vegetables. After Marilyn's visits, Bobby retreated into a shell of silence that I couldn't penetrate. It was painfully clear whose side he was on, and it wasn't mine. One particularly tense evening, after Marilyn had criticized everything from my cooking to my housekeeping, I confronted him. Why don't you ever stand up for me? I demanded. Your mother treats me like I'm invisible, and you just let her. Is this what our marriage is supposed to be? Bobby looked weary. Emma, she's old-fashioned. What do you want me to do? Cut her off? No, I want you to support me, to tell her she can't bulldoze over us. Is that asking too much? He sighed, raking his fingers through his hair. I'll talk to her, okay? Just give it some time, she'll adjust. But she didn't, neither did he. The distance between us grew, widened by Marilyn's coldness and Bobby's passivity, creating a chasm that felt impossible to bridge. Living with Bobby started to feel like being part of a melodrama, where the cracks in our perfect facade began to show. He worked at a prestigious art gallery, an impressive-sounding role until you considered how erratic his earnings were. Meanwhile, my detective work provided a comfortable lifestyle in a stylish apartment. One evening, as we discussed our future over dinner, I brought up the idea of eventually buying a house, envisioning the space we'd need if we planned to start a family. Bobby paused, his fork covering midair, and looked at me quizzically. Emma, where are you getting these ideas? We don't need a house, and me finding a new job isn't on the agenda. I set my fork down, trying to maintain a calm tone. It's not about need, Bobby, it's about planning for our future. A stable income would certainly help. He chuckled, a sound that used to warm my heart but now grated against my patience. You and your fixation on money, he said lightly. You always focus on the financial bottom line, don't you? Money isn't everything, Emma. His laughter pushed me to the edge. It's easy for you to say when you're not the one stressed about paying the bills each month. I'm not fixated on money, Bobby. He shrugged dismissively and returned to his meal as if we were merely discussing the weather. I'm happy with our life as it is. You're the one who's never satisfied. I stood, my appetite gone. Maybe I wouldn't be so focused on money if you contributed more than just critiques about how I manage ours. He didn't even glance up. I contribute in other ways, Emma. Not everything is about money. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. This wasn't just about buying a house, planning for kids, or finances. It was about respect, partnership, and support, none of which Bobby seemed to value. As long as his life remained comfortable, he dismissed my concerns as an obsession with money, sidestepping the real issues between us. On a seemingly ordinary Sunday, our living room became an impromptu stage for high drama when Marilyn, my not-so-favorite mother-in-law, dropped by unannounced. The air grew tense as she remained glued to her phone, her voice wavering between panic and confusion. "And you're telling me my social security number has been suspended? How much do I need to pay to fix this?" Marilyn's voice cracked as she rummaged through her purse for her checkbook and documents. In the kitchen, coffee in hand, I overheard her mention social security and payments. Years of police work had sharpened my instincts, and alarm bells rang in my head. This was a scam. I hurried into the living room, my approach quiet but quick. "Marilyn, hang up the phone. It's a scam," I interjected, my tone firm but calm. She turned to me, shocked and offended. "I beg your pardon? I'm handling this, Emma. There's no need for your intrusion." Before she could protest further, I stepped forward and ended the call with a decisive click. Silence enveloped the room, thick with tension. Marilyn recoiled, her face twisting into an expression of fury and disbelief. "How dare you? That was incredibly rude and uncalled for. Who do you think you are, treating me like some naive child?" Bobby appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. His expression was a mix of concern and frustration. "Emma, what's going on? Why are you upsetting my mother?" I turned to him, my frustration mounting. "That call was from scammers, Bobby. They were trying to con Marilyn out of her money by claiming her social security number was suspended. It's a common tactic. I've seen it 100 times." Bobby rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I recognized as him feeling cornered. "Okay, but couldn't you have been more diplomatic about it?" Marilyn, gathering her belongings with shaking hands, shot me a look sharp enough to curdle milk. "I don't need to be saved, especially not by someone who treats me with such disrespect. I'll speak to the bank about this so-called scam." She stormed out, leaving a chilly silence behind. Bobby sighed, his gaze shifting between the door and me. "Emma, I know you meant well, but you have to handle things more gently, especially with my mother." I felt a twinge of guilt but stood my ground. I know it seemed harsh, but there wasn't time for polite exchanges. Scammers thrive on urgency, and any hesitation could have cost Marilyn dearly. The next day, still feeling a mix of curiosity and guilt, I decided to call her. After 3 rings, she picked up, her voice cold and measured. "What do you want, Emma?" I cleared my throat. "I just wanted to check on you after yesterday. Did you speak with the bank about that call?" There was a pause before she reluctantly admitted. "Yes, I did. They confirmed it was a scam." Her tone hardened. "But that doesn't excuse how you handled things. You were rude and aggressive." I pinched the bridge of my nose, feeling a headache coming on. "I'm sorry if I seemed harsh. I was just trying to protect you. These scammers are professional deceivers and very convincing." Her reply was curt, laced with begrudging gratitude. "Well, I suppose I should thank you for stopping me from making a mistake, but don't think this changes my view of your methods or your demeanor. Goodbye, Emma." The tension between Bobby and me deepened, turning our home from a warm sanctuary into a chilly battlefield. Clinging to hope, I saw his upcoming birthday as an opportunity to rekindle the fading spark in our relationship. I meticulously planned a weekend getaway just for the two of us, dreaming of restoring what we once had. However, Marilyn bulldozed through my plans with her own, scheduling a grand dinner at her mansion on a weekday, fully aware my work schedule was overflowing. I pleaded with her over the phone. "Can't we push it to Saturday? I'm swamped at work." Her voice was a blend of syrup and frost. "No, dear, this is when it's happening. Bobby shouldn't have to adjust his birthday to fit around your job." Frustration gnawed at me as I confided in my boss, a veteran of countless betrayals and deceptions. He understood the importance of gestures. "Go," he urged, giving me a knowing look. "Do what you need to do." Arriving at Marilyn's, the party was already in full swing, an ostentatious display of pretense. Marilyn spotted me immediately, her smile tightening as she whispered something to Bobby. There he was, my husband, ensconced by the fireplace, his arm casually draped around a woman who was more than just a colleague. My heart sank, but I steeled myself and approached them. "Aren't you going to introduce me?" I tried to keep my voice steady, though my emotions churned. "Bobby, aren't you going to introduce me?" He flinched, his eyes widening in shock. Emma, this is Lori, from the gallery," he muttered, glancing nervously at her before turning to me. "And this is Emma, a relative." The words hit me like a slap. "A relative?" My voice rose before I could stop it. "Your wife, Bobby, or have you conveniently forgotten?" The room fell silent, the tension crackling like static electricity. Bobby's expression twisted, a mixture of embarrassment and irritation. "You know," he snapped, "a real wife would have made her husband's birthday a priority." He turned away dismissively, his words cutting deeper than I thought possible. Before I could respond, Marilyn appeared, her voice dripping with disdain. "You see, Emma, you just don't fit in here. Bobby needs someone supportive, like Lori, not whatever this is." She gestured vaguely at me, her disdain unmistakable. Her next words were cold and biting. "I think it's best if you leave. You're not wanted here." I stood frozen for a moment, Marilyn's venomous words echoing in my ears. Then, I straightened my spine and met her gaze with all the strength I could muster. "You're right, Marilyn. I don't belong in a family built on lies and deception." With as much dignity as I could gather, I walked out, the chill of the night air wrapping around me like an unwelcome embrace. After the debacle of Bobby's birthday and the revelations that followed, I knew I needed undeniable proof to sever this marriage on my terms. But the idea of uncovering Bobby's betrayal myself was unbearable. I reached out to Alan, a trusted colleague with a knack for uncovering discreet affairs. "Alan," I said, my voice barely steady, "I need a favor." "Anything for you," he replied without hesitation. "What's going on?" "It's Bobby. I think he's seeing someone. I need evidence," I admitted, the words tasting bitter. "Say no more," Alan assured me. "I'll handle it discreetly. You'll have everything you need." He was true to his word. The evidence he gathered was damning: photos, audio, and more. Lori wasn't just a fling. She was here illegally, seeking a quick marriage to secure her status. She and Bobby had even been involved in fraud. Part of me wanted to confront Bobby with the evidence, but I knew better. He didn't deserve my anger, my pain, or my time. Filing for divorce was painful but necessary, like tearing off a band-aid over a festering wound. I demanded financial compensation, just a fraction of what I had lost emotionally and financially during our marriage. Marilyn, ever the dragon lady, sided with Bobby, painting me as the villain, but armed with the evidence, I stood my ground. When the papers were signed, I felt an overwhelming sense of release. It wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of a new life. I poured my energy into opening my detective agency, turning my pain into purpose. The agency thrived quickly, building a reputation for discretion and effectiveness. It was a reflection of everything I'd learned: the lies, the betrayals, and the resilience I had cultivated. Every case was a small victory, a piece of myself healing as I helped others uncover their own truths. One morning, as I sifted through files, Alice, my right-hand woman, peeked into my office. "Boss, we've got a potential case. A woman suspects her husband is having an affair." I smiled, the irony not lost on me. "Sounds like our bread and butter. What's the catch?" "She's on a tight budget," Alice said. I thought for a moment. This was my chance to help someone like the person I used to be. "We'll work with her budget," I decided. "And Alice, let's make sure we're thorough. I know all too well what it's like to be on the other side of this." Life has a way of coming full circle. A week after Marilyn's surprise visit to my agency, my phone buzzed with a number I thought I'd erased. Seeing Bobby's name flash on the screen felt surreal. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Emma," he began, his voice carrying a blend of hope and desperation. "I've been thinking. I want us to start over, have kids, build a future together." I snorted, unable to hold back my disbelief. "Really? And where would we live in this fantasy of yours?" "With my mom, at first," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "We'll save money, and then you can buy us a house. It'll be perfect." This time, I laughed, loud and unrestrained. "You really haven't changed, Bobby. You still think I exist to clean up your messes and fund your dreams." "Emma, please," he stammered. "I've changed. We can fix this." I paused, reflecting on the years I had wasted and the strength I had found since leaving him. Then, with a calm I hadn't known before, I said, "No, Bobby, you haven't changed. Goodbye. Hanging up felt like closing the final chapter of a book I'd long since finished. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. As I returned to my work, I felt a surge of purpose. The past was behind me, and the future stretched out like a blank canvas, ready for me to paint with bold, vibrant strokes. Life's best revenge is living well, and I was fully committed to doing just that. Life in the urban sprawl as a police officer doesn't just toughen you, it encases you in a shell of skepticism so impenetrable it might as well be Kevlar. That was me, Emma, a 37-year-old former lieutenant turned private detective, lugging around a suitcase of mistrust heavier than the cases I cracked. My daily grind revolved around unfaithful partners and the art of deception, not exactly the setting for a romantic fairy tale. Then Bobby walked into my life. A beacon of modern art in a world full of cynicism, refreshing my reality like a vibrant brushstroke on a fading mural. We met at an art exhibition in Philadelphia, a venue teeming with enthusiasts throwing around terms like postmodern and avant-garde with effortless poise. Feeling out of place, I wandered the gallery like a fish trying to pedal a bicycle. Intriguing piece, isn't it? Bobby's voice cut through my discomfort, his gaze fixed on what appeared to be a strategically arranged heap of junk. If by intriguing, you mean I've seen tidier trash heaps, then absolutely, it's fascinating, I quipped. His laugh was deep and warm. Turning a few heads, he introduced himself, and from that moment, my life took on a new hue. Fast forward 7 months, and I was utterly smitten, caught up in a whirlwind romance that felt surreal. Bobby, with his dapper style and old-world charm, swept me off my feet with poetry readings, art shows, and the kind of attention that made me feel like the only woman alive. Under a starlit sky in Central Park, he proposed, and without hesitation, I said yes, my heart pounding with sheer joy. But every fairy tale has its shadows. Enter Marilyn, Bobby's mother, the epitome of frostiness. Our first dinner together was tense, with Marilyn scrutinizing me as if I were an unworthy intruder in her carefully curated world. A detective? Isn't that a bit unladylike? She asked, her tone sharp. Depends on the century your expectations are anchored in, I replied without missing a beat, earning a tense smile from Bobby. Marilyn's visits became frequent audits of my life. 3 weeks into our marriage, she appeared unannounced. Emma, darling, she began, her voice dripping with condescension, still clinging to that quaint little job of yours? I had hoped marriage would refine you. Slicing vegetables for dinner, I gripped the knife a little tighter. Marilyn, where I come from, we call this earning a living. Maybe you should try it sometime instead of leeching off others. I shot back, keeping my voice steady. Her lips pursed tightly. Bobby was raised with certain expectations. Emma, there's still time for you to find a more suitable career. Like being a full-time meddler? I retorted. Thanks, but I'll stick to tracking down cheaters and liars. Speaking of which, how's your bridge club treating you? Bobby walked in just then, his timing impeccable as always. What's going on? He asked, looking between us. Your wife was clarifying her career choices for me, Marilyn said, her tone overly sweet. Bobby sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Mom, Emma's career is important to her. It's part of who she is. Turning to me, he pleaded, Emma, let's not do this now, please. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but I held back. Fine, I said curtly, returning to the vegetables. After Marilyn's visits, Bobby would retreat into a frustrating silence. It became painfully clear whose side he was on, and it wasn't mine. One evening, after Marilyn criticized everything from my cooking to my housekeeping, I confronted him. Why don't you ever stand up for me? Your mother treats me like I'm invisible, and you just let her. Is this what our marriage is supposed to be? He looked weary. Emma, she's old-fashioned. What do you want me to do? Cut her off? No, I replied, exasperated. I want you to support me, to tell her she can't bulldoze over us. Is that asking too much? I'll talk to her, okay? Just give it time. She'll adjust, he said, raking his fingers through his hair. But she didn't adjust, neither did he. The gap between us grew, fueled by Marilyn's coldness and Bobby's passivity, forming a rift too vast to bridge. Living with Bobby began to feel like starring in a melodrama where the cracks in the perfect facade only widened. His job at a prestigious art gallery sounded impressive, but his earnings were erratic at best. Meanwhile, I was left wondering if this was the love story I had signed up for, or a cautionary tale in disguise. I was doing well, securing a comfortable lifestyle for us in a stylish apartment in a desirable neighborhood. One evening, over dinner, I decided to bring up the future. I'd been thinking, I started, setting my fork down. Eventually, it'd be nice to buy a house, you know, something with enough space if we decide to start a family. Bobby paused, his fork midair, looking at me like I'd just suggested moving to Mars. Emma, where are you getting these ideas? We don't need a house, and me finding a new job? That's not even on the radar. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my tone even. It's not about needing it, Bobby, it's about planning, stability, thinking ahead. He chuckled, the sound once warm but now grating on my nerves. You and your fixation on money, always crunching the numbers. Money isn't everything, Emma. That laugh, that dismissive laugh, pushed me to the edge. Easy for you to say when you're not the one stressed about paying the bills each month. I shot back, my voice tight. He shrugged, as though brushing away my words. I'm happy with our life as it is. You're the one who's never satisfied. The fork in my hand felt heavier than it should as I placed it on my plate. Maybe I wouldn't be so focused on money if you contributed more than critiques about how I manage it. He didn't even glance up, just kept eating. I contribute in other ways, Emma, not everything is about money. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thoughts racing. It wasn't just about the house, or kids, or finances. It was about respect, partnership, and support, none of which Bobby seemed to value. As long as his life was comfortable, my concerns were dismissed as some misguided obsession with money. On a seemingly ordinary Sunday, the tension in our apartment reached a new peak when Marilyn, my ever-charming mother-in-law, made one of her unannounced visits. The living room became a stage for unexpected drama as I watched her pacing, phone pressed to her ear, her voice wavering between panic and disbelief. You're telling me my social security number has been suspended? She exclaimed, fumbling through her purse for her checkbook. How much do I need to pay to fix this? From the kitchen, coffee in hand, I overheard the words social security and payment, and every instinct honed from years of police work screamed scam. Setting the mug down, I walked briskly into the living room. Marilyn, hang up, it's a scam, I said firmly but calmly, trying to convey urgency without escalating her panic. She turned to me, eyes wide and face flushed. I beg your pardon? I'm handling this, Emma, there's no need for your intrusion. I could see she was shaken but too proud to admit it. Before she could press further, I leaned in and said more firmly, Marilyn, trust me, I've dealt with hundreds of these cases. They're trying to steal from you. Her lips pursed tightly, but she hesitated, phone still in her hand. I reached out gently, hang up, and we'll call the real Social Security office together. You'll see. Reluctantly, she ended the call. The tension in the room hung thick as Bobby finally stepped in, his expression torn between annoyance and concern. Mom, you should have listened to Emma from the start, he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. But instead of gratitude, Marilyn's glare shifted to me. It's always so convenient for her to play the hero, isn't it? And just like that, the gratitude I'd hoped for evaporated. I clenched my jaw, swallowing the retort on the tip of my tongue, knowing this was a fight that wouldn't be worth winning. I stepped forward, grabbed the phone, and ended the call with a sharp click. The room fell into tense silence. Marilyn recoiled, her face a storm of fury and disbelief. How dare you? She exclaimed, her voice trembling. That was incredibly rude and uncalled for. Who do you think you are, treating me like some naive child? Before I could respond, Bobby appeared in the doorway, his expression a mix of concern and frustration. Emma, what's going on? Why are you upsetting my mother? I turned to him, frustration bubbling over. That call was from scammers, Bobby. They were trying to con Marilyn out of her money, claiming her social security number was suspended. It's a common scam, I've seen it countless times. Bobby rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I knew well. It meant he felt caught in the middle. Okay, but couldn't you have handled it more diplomatically? Marilyn, her hands trembling as she gathered her belongings, shot me a glare sharp enough to cut glass. I don't need saving, especially not from someone who treats me so disrespectfully. I'll speak with the bank and see what they say about this so-called scam. She stormed out, leaving a frosty silence in her wake. Bobby sighed, his eyes shifting between the door and me. Emma, I know you meant well, but you have to handle things more gently, especially with my mother. I felt a pang of guilt but held my ground. Bobby, I know it seemed harsh, but scammers thrive on urgency. There wasn't time for polite exchanges. Any hesitation could have cost her thousands. The next day, still wrestling with a mix of guilt and curiosity, I called Marilyn. After 3 rings, she answered, her tone cold and measured. What do you want, Emma? I cleared my throat. I just wanted to check on you after yesterday. Did you speak with the bank about the call? There was a long pause before she replied, her voice reluctant. Yes, I did. They confirmed it was a scam. Relief washed over me, but her tone quickly hardened. That doesn't excuse how you handled things. You were rude and aggressive. Pinching the bridge of my nose, I felt a headache building. I'm sorry if I came across as harsh. I was trying to protect you. These scammers are professionals, they're convincing, and they rely on people hesitating. Her response was curt, though tinged with begrudging acknowledgement. Well, I suppose I should thank you for stopping me from making a mistake, but don't think this changes my opinion of your methods, or your demeanor. Goodbye, Emma. I saw Bobby's upcoming birthday as a chance to bridge the growing chasm between us, a hopeful opportunity to rekindle the fading spark in our relationship. Carefully, I planned a romantic weekend getaway, envisioning it as a step toward restoring what we once had. But fate, or Marilyn, had other plans. She bulldozed my efforts with her own agenda, scheduling a grand dinner at her mansion on a weekday, fully aware of my packed work schedule. Over the phone, I pleaded, can't we move it to Saturday? I'm drowning at work. Her voice was a blend of saccharine sweetness and icy control. No, dear, this is when it's happening. Bobby shouldn't have to adjust his birthday to fit around your job. Frustration gnawed at me, and I found myself confiding in my boss, the only person who seemed to understand. He'd witnessed more betrayals than most and recognized the importance of the moment. Go, he urged with a knowing look. Do what you need to do. When I arrived at Marilyn's, the party was already in full swing, a spectacle of ostentation and pretense. Marilyn spotted me immediately, her smile tightening as she whispered something to Bobby. My eyes followed her line of sight, and there he was, my husband, sitting by the fireplace, his arm draped casually around a woman who was far more than just a colleague. My heart sank, but I steeled myself and approached. Aren't you going to introduce me? I asked, trying to sound composed despite the whirlwind of emotions inside. Bobby flinched, his eyes widening in surprise. Ah, Emma, this is Lori from the gallery, he mumbled, turning awkwardly to the woman. And this is, Emma, a relative. The word struck like a slap. A relative? Seriously, Bobby? I couldn't contain my incredulity. Your wife, Bobby, remember? My voice carried across the room, silencing the hum of conversations. All eyes turned to us. Bobby's face turned red with a mix of embarrassment and irritation. You know, a real wife would have made her husband's birthday a priority. He shot back, dismissing me with a turn of his shoulder. Before I could respond, Marilyn appeared, her voice oozing disdain. You see, Emma, you just don't fit in here. Bobby needs someone supportive, like Lori, not, whatever this is. Her words, sharp and deliberate, cut deep. She gestured toward the door with a venomous smile. I think it's best if you leave. You're not wanted here. I took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of dignity I had left. You know what, Marilyn? Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't belong in a family that thrives on lies and deception. Without another word, I turned and walked out into the cold night, the chill wrapping around me like the icy aftermath of betrayal. After the disaster at Bobby's birthday and the stark revelations that followed, I knew I needed irrefutable proof to end the marriage on my terms. The thought of investigating Bobby myself felt unbearable. I could handle uncovering secrets about strangers, but not about the man I had once envisioned growing old with. So, I called Alan, a trusted colleague with a knack for uncovering discreet affairs. Hey, Alan, I need a favor, I said, steadying my voice over the phone. Anything for you, what's up? He responded, his loyalty a small comfort in the storm of betrayal. It's Bobby, I admitted, the words tasting bitter. I'm sure he's seeing someone. I need evidence. I admitted the truth, my words carrying a mix of relief and dread. Say no more, Alan said confidently. I'll handle it discreetly. You'll have everything you need soon. His assurance eased some of my anxiety. True to his word, Alan delivered everything, photos, audio clips, and undeniable proof. Lori wasn't just a colleague. She was in the country illegally, seeking a quick marriage to fix her immigration status while involved in fraud. Part of me wanted to confront Bobby, to throw the evidence in his face and watch him squirm, but then I remembered his condescension, his smug expression, and his blatant dismissal of me. No, he didn't deserve my concern or my help. Filing for divorce was like tearing off a band-aid from a wound that had been festering for far too long. I demanded financial compensation, the bare minimum after his betrayal. The fallout was explosive. Marilyn, ever the dragon lady, stood firmly by Bobby's side, painting me as the villain, but I stood my ground, fueled by both the evidence and the injustice of their accusations. When the ink on the divorce papers dried, it wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of a new chapter, a rebirth from the ashes of my life with Bobby. Opening my detective agency wasn't just a dream fulfilled, it was a testament to my resilience. The agency quickly built a reputation for discretion and effectiveness, a reflection of the lessons I had learned through my own struggles. One morning, sunlight streamed into my new office, illuminating the framed license on the wall. Alice, my right-hand woman and confidant, peeked in. "Boss lady, you've got a minute? We've got a potentially big case. A woman suspects her husband of having an affair. She wants surveillance, photos, the works." I couldn't help but smile at the irony. "Sounds like our bread and butter. Do we have the details?" Alice nodded, placing a file on my desk. "Yeah, but there's a catch. She's on a tight budget." I thought for a moment, realizing this was my chance to pay it forward. Tell her we'll work with her budget. And Alice? Let's make sure we're thorough. I know all too well what it's like to be on the other side of this conversation. Alice grinned. "Knew you'd say that. You're a good person, you know." I smirked. "Try telling that to my ex." As the days passed and the cases piled up, each one felt like a step toward healing. Infidelity, secrets, and lies, these were the patterns I had grown familiar with. Yet, with each closed case, I felt another piece of myself mend, validation that I had made the right choice to start over. Then one morning, as the city stirred awake, an elderly woman burst into the office, her distress palpable. She argued with my receptionist about her son's wife, who had vanished with a large sum of money, leaving the family in financial ruins. She insisted on speaking to the agency owner and mentioned needing a payment plan. Curiosity piqued. I decided to meet her myself. To my astonishment, I found myself face to face with Marilyn, my former mother-in-law. Recognition flickered across her face before embarrassment set in. "Emma, you run this agency?" "I do," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the swirl of emotions. "How can I help?" Desperation overtook her shame. "You have to help me find her. The woman who ran off with my son's money. Bobby's in shambles. Do it for the family's sake, without charge." Her audacity rendered me momentarily speechless. "Marilyn, first, we're not family. Second, I run a business, not a charity for ex-in-laws." "Emma, after everything, can't you do this one thing? It's the least you could do," she pressed. I laughed bitterly. "The least I could do? Marilyn, after your son cheated on me, you expect me to just forgive and forget? Go to the police. They're better equipped for this." She stood there, flabbergasted, as if the thought of me refusing her had never crossed her mind. "Marilyn, I've learned my lesson. Never trust scammers and liars. Maybe it's time you did too." The decision was final. Life, it seemed, had come full circle, but I had no intention of being dragged back into their chaos. A week later, my phone buzzed. The caller ID showed a number I thought I had erased. "Bobby." Against my better judgment, I answered. "Bobby, what do you want?" "Emma," he began, his tone tentative. "I've been thinking. I want us to start over. For the kids, you know." I couldn't help but snort. "Really? And where would we live in this fantasy of yours?" "With my mom, at first," he said eagerly. "We can save money, then you can buy us a house. It'll be perfect." I laughed, the absurdity of his proposal striking me fully. "You think I'd come back to play house with you and your mom, and then foot the bill for a big house?" "Emma, I've changed. Please," he pleaded. "Bobby," I said firmly, "you haven't changed a bit. Goodbye." As I hung up, a profound sense of peace washed over me. The call, absurd as it was, served as validation. I had grown, I had healed, and I had reclaimed my life. The future lay ahead, bright and brimming with promise. Turning back to my work, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. After all, the best revenge is living well, and I was doing just that.
An old man with dementia is nothing but a burden, I thought. The idea of spending my remaining years caring for someone in such a state was unbearable. I longed for a fresh start in a new home with a new partner. My mother-in-law, clearly determined to leave her husband behind, was ready to start anew despite his condition and the $3.3 million debt he carried. I can't continue as his wife any longer, she declared. You, on the other hand, seem to get along with him. Take care of his debt and look after him, will you? With that, she left the house she had shared with him for many years, leaving me with a mixture of shock and loneliness. Seeing her leave so cheerfully was jarring. I approached my father-in-law, who stood quietly at the entrance. Thank you, Tom, for always treating me with kindness, I said. I appreciate that you consider me like your real daughter. As your daughter-in-law, I'll do everything I can. Let's work through this together. Despite my words, I was filled with uncertainty about how to support him and alleviate his suffering. Yet, I felt a strong resolve to encourage him and envision a brighter future. When I noticed his shoulders trembling, I leaned in, thinking he was crying. To my surprise, he was chuckling. I've been waiting for her to leave for a long time, he said, catching me off guard. He began to share stories from the past and his plans for the future. I'm Naomi, 42 years old, and I lead a vibrant life with my wonderful husband, Harry, and his loving parents. Originally from a small town in Chicago, I moved to New York for university and then dove into the IT industry. It was there that I met Harry, my calm and serious boss. As we grew closer, we began to envision a future together. We decided to marry, and I chose to live with Harry's warm family. Although I was initially nervous about living with his family, having been raised by just my mother, the challenges of dealing with my fertility issues made me yearn for a lively family life. My father-in-law, Tham, was the president of the company I used to work for. Harry, his son, had started from the bottom and was steadily climbing the ranks. It wasn't until we decided to marry that I realized Harry was the son of the company's top executive. After our wedding, I left my job, but Harry continued to rise through the ranks. He started questioning Tom's business policies and had ambitions to grow the company himself. As Tom aged, rumors spread that he might retire, and Harry seemed to be waiting for that moment. Despite his age, Tom remained energetic and eager to try new things. He recently expressed a desire to create a space in his home for the local community to relax, chat, enjoy tea, and share homemade meals. However, my mother-in-law was completely against this idea. Even though she was only 5 years younger than Tom and meticulously maintained her appearance, she wasn't great at housework. Their meals were mostly takeout, and they often hired professionals for cleaning. Their affluent lifestyle was supported by Tom's stable job, but with his impending retirement, their income would decrease. The prospect of having strangers in their home for the community space stressed my mother-in-law. Despite Tom's respect for her wishes, he couldn't give up on his dream. Consequently, the renovation project was postponed. In the end, Tom decided to step down due to health concerns. Harry was chosen as the next president, but instead of taking over all at once, he would gradually learn the ropes until he was ready for full responsibility. My mother-in-law had become increasingly distant from my father-in-law. Even when he appeared tired and worn out, she ignored him and offered no support. The tension in their home grew palpable as she struggled to support his dream, and their interactions became strained. When Harry first began taking over the business, he and his father maintained a close and communicative relationship. However, as Harry gained confidence in his role, his demeanor at home began to change. He started treating his father with the same coldness that his mother displayed. Tom began to voice concerns about Harry's behavior at the company. Despite Harry's enthusiasm for his work, Tom worried that his son's attitude towards his colleagues and the work environment was problematic. Tom once confided in me that he feared Harry might be too harsh with his subordinates. Having experienced my own parents' divorce and a limited relationship with my biological father, Tom holds a special place in my heart. He's always been warm yet self-disciplined, and I deeply respect him as if he were my own father. He also cares for me and has started to share his thoughts and feelings with me, which has made it all the more painful to witness the growing distance between him, my mother-in-law, and Harry. Both were stubborn and resistant to any attempts I made to encourage openness. Then, one day, my mother-in-law suggested a family meeting. She proposed selling their current house and building a new one. I was intrigued by how the family would respond. There's an old house for sale next door, she said. It's a bit dated, but with some care and attention, It could become a beautiful home. We could even create a lovely space in the garden for everyone to enjoy. Her enthusiasm was a refreshing change from her usual reluctance. Tom's eyes lit up at the idea. That sounds wonderful. We could definitely make a space in the garden for everyone to enjoy. Harry smiled and said, "If it makes you happy, I'm all for it." And so, plans for the new house began, with my mother-in-law taking the lead on the project. When I inquired about the progress of the new house, my mother-in-law confidently told me to leave it to her and not to interfere. She seemed to be communicating frequently with Harry, and I assumed things were going smoothly. However, I was stunned when I received shocking news. My father-in-law had accumulated a debt of $3.3 million. Despite his reputation as a seasoned business figure with substantial investment experience, his calm demeanor had concealed the scale of his financial troubles. My mother-in-law's first reaction was to worry about the future of the new house. Although my father-in-law tried to reassure her, saying, "Don't worry, everything will be all right. I'll sort it out," her anxiety was palpable. She began treating him even more coldly than before. One day, while I was washing dishes in the kitchen, I overheard a hushed conversation between Harry and my mother-in-law. They were discussing the ownership of the new house, and I was shocked to learn that despite my father-in-law providing the funds, they were planning to proceed with the house under Harry's name without informing Tom. I couldn't believe they were making such a significant decision without involving him. Aren't you both making decisions about such an important matter without including everyone? Shouldn't the whole family discuss this together? My mother-in-law's response was sharp. You know, Tom is showing his age, and there's also the debt issue. Besides, you've only recently joined this family. It's best if you just observe and stay quiet for now. The only person I truly rely on is Harry. Her blunt words stung, and Harry didn't offer much of a response. He had been so absorbed in his work lately that our time together as a couple had diminished. The only person I genuinely trusted and could confide in was my father-in-law. Yet recently he seemed different. Where he once was lively and busy, he now spent more time sitting on the couch, lost in thought. I suspected that my father-in-law might be troubled by his debts, but it seemed like there was something more going on. "Have we had dinner yet?" he suddenly asked as I was finishing up the dishes. "We just had hamburgers, salad, and soup together," I replied after a moment of thought. "Right, sorry about that," he said and retreated to his room. His forgetfulness was unusual, and it made me uneasy. I suggested that he see a doctor, but he dismissed it with a laugh, attributing it to fatigue. When I spoke with my mother-in-law, she remarked, "Tom's charm was his intelligence and his money. Without those, he's nothing." I also discussed it with Harry, but he seemed preoccupied with work. He mentioned that things felt off and that there was a need for timely leadership at the company. Amidst all this, I felt a deep sense of loneliness, as if no one in the family was genuinely concerned. I repeatedly urged my father-in-law to see a doctor, but he consistently refused. His condition seemed to worsen, and I took it upon myself to research dementia, trying various approaches and continuously persuading him to get help. "You must be having a hard time," my mother-in-law said with a sigh and a cold smile. "Tom isn't the man he used to be. Once Harry takes over the company, everything will be his. Isn't it only natural that Tom should have nothing left?" Her eyes were colder than I had ever seen, a look I had never encountered before. Her harsh words and the growing tension in the house left me feeling both surprised and anxious. With the atmosphere growing more strained, I hoped that moving to a new house would help refresh our spirits. Finally, the moving day arrived. We hired professionals to handle the large furniture while we took care of the smaller items. My mother-in-law provided specific instructions such as where to place each item, and we followed them carefully. The last items to be moved were the cherished belongings of my father-in-law and me. I returned to our old place to fetch my father-in-law when my mother-in-law appeared unexpectedly. "Thank you, everything is sorted now," she said. "Actually, I've arranged another moving destination for you as well." Her shocking revelation left me speechless. I stammered, "What do you mean?" She handed me a note with the address of a nearby flat. Seeing her smiling face, I was at a loss for words. She cheerfully explained, "The new house will be for me, Harry, and Ted to enjoy. So you and Tom should start fresh in your new place." I couldn't grasp what was happening. The only thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't leave my father-in-law alone. As I prepared to leave, she added, "Well, Tom needs you now. Do your best for him. We can think about what comes next when the time is right. My mind was spinning with shock and confusion. Who was this Ted she mentioned? I could hardly think straight. How can you abandon Tom after all the years of support he's given to the family? I asked, my voice trembling. She laughed, absent-mindedly playing with her hair. I want to enjoy my life too. I've taken care of Tom's needs, but daily life with him has become tedious. I want a fresh start with Ted. I couldn't believe her words. It seemed my mother-in-law was set on leaving her long supportive husband to pursue a new life with someone else. Tears welled up in my eyes. So all your plans for a new life come at our expense? With a glint in her eye, she replied, grow up a little. We all have the right to seek new beginnings. Besides, if people knew about Tom's $3.3 million debt, they'd reconsider too. For a moment, I was utterly speechless, struggling to process the gravity of her decision. I was stunned by my mother-in-law's audacity. Despite my shock and confusion, I knew I had to stay calm and handle the situation for my own sake. You're saddled with a $3.3 million debt, and continuing this marriage is unfeasible, she said dismissively. My husband seems to have a fondness for you, so you can manage the debt and take care of him. With that, she offloaded her responsibilities onto me and left the house without a second thought about the dire situation her husband was in. Watching her leave with such confidence, I was overwhelmed by a mix of shock and loneliness. After she departed, I approached my father-in-law, who stood dejectedly at the entrance. Tom, thank you for always being so kind to me, I said softly. I'm honored that you see me as your own daughter. I promise to do everything I can as your daughter-in-law. We'll face this together. Although I tried to comfort him, I was engulfed by anxiety, unsure how to support him and ease his suffering. Yet a deep desire to help the man I respected and to envision a brighter future for him filled my heart. As his shoulders began to tremble, I leaned in, worried that he might be crying. To my surprise, he was laughing uncontrollably. I'd been waiting for her to leave for a long time, he said, his laughter still echoing. His unexpected reaction left me stunned. He continued, when she talked about wanting a new house, I saw it as an opportunity. She's so dependent on me that I hoped she'd ask for a divorce. I didn't expect to be kicked out of the house, though. I was dumbfounded by his revelation. His elaborate act had completely fooled me. Seeing the confusion on my face, Tom smiled gently. Naomi, I'm sorry things turned out this way, but don't worry about the investment. Even if it goes wrong, we won't lose much. Now the real adventure begins. When we arrived at the new house, my mother-in-law was visibly upset. Naomi, why did you bring Tom here? You two were supposed to move into a flat. Plus, my new boyfriend is coming tomorrow. Harry's taking over the business, so I need Tom's bank statements, she demanded, flustered. Tom, seemingly unaffected by her dismay, turned to her with a steely gaze. I know you plan to enjoy your time with your new lover, he said, shifting the atmosphere dramatically. My mother-in-law was taken aback, and Harry stood silent, watching the confrontation unfold. I've already transferred the ownership of this house to my name, my father-in-law said with a hint of apology. It'll be difficult for you to stay here now. His words left my mother-in-law speechless, her eyes widening in disbelief. But don't worry, I found a flat nearby for you. Enjoy your new life with your boyfriend. I'll cover the rent for the first few months, he added, his smile cold. Until that day, my father-in-law had always dealt with my mother-in-law's selfishness with patience and a smile. But now his eyes were sharp with anger, and his stern demeanor seemed to make her shrink. I'm truly sorry, she said, her voice trembling as she fought back tears. I was scared when I thought you had dementia, and when I heard about the $3.3 million debt, I was overwhelmed with anxiety. But I've always loved you. I never imagined it would end like this. Her words were filled with regret and desperation, but it was too late for apologies. My father-in-law chuckled bitterly. The $3.3 million debt isn't as daunting as it seems. I married you for your vibrant spirit, not for your money. It's clear now that love isn't in your heart. I want to spend my remaining years in peace, and I don't want you here anymore. Please leave. Without even looking at her, he asked her to leave. Harry, stunned, gathered my mother-in-law's belongings and placed them by the door. He didn't want to abandon her but seemed to be trying to make amends with his father, perhaps to protect his own interests. What are you saying, Harry? Are you leaving me behind? Help me. Forgive me just one more time, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Ignoring her cries, my father-in-law and Harry walked into their new home. Her heartbreaking screams echoed in the tense atmosphere, but I followed them inside. Later, Harry made desperate attempts to reconcile with his father, but his work attitudes and interpersonal issues proved problematic. The company had another promising successor who had been performing well, and responsibilities were gradually being handed over to him. Consequently, my father-in-law entrusted the company to this new successor and stepped down as president. Harry, who had assumed he would naturally take over, was deeply shocked. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law began her new life in a small flat with her affair partner Ted. However, her new life didn't bring the happiness she had hoped for. Eventually, their relationship soured, leaving her alone once again. Concerned for her, I occasionally checked in on her. Her current state, far from her once glamorous days, was lonely and hard to witness. In contrast, my father-in-law and I began building a community space in our area. He provided the financial support, while I worked diligently to create a welcoming environment. The space became a local sensation, featured in magazines and online, and attracted many visitors. Riding this wave, we established an organization and expanded our activities. Harry, having left his previous job, now participates in our efforts. He used to be quite prideful, but through interactions with diverse people, I hope he becomes kinder and more compassionate. Together, we aim to fulfill Tom's dream and strengthen our community bonds, looking forward to many joyful days ahead.
As they were about to stay with us, I hadn't made a reservation. My mind was blank with hostility on this family vacation that I didn't even want to go on, ending up at a fancy hotel. My husband, Spencer, pretends not to be aware of her animosity toward me and walks away, leaving me behind with a casual, "We'll see you at checkout, Emily." They disappear into the luxurious hotel. My name is Emily, and I finally turned 30 this year. I'm a stay-at-home mom living with Spencer, my mother-in-law Kate, and my son Sean, who turned 3 this year. Spencer and I met on a blind date 7 years ago and ended up marrying. We've been living an ordinary life without any major quarrels, known to be a couple very much in love among the neighbors. 2 years after we got married, we had our son. Spencer was busy with work, but actively helped me with childcare. I had no complaints about him, and we were living in a normal family environment. However, after the birth of Sean, things started to deteriorate. 6 months ago, my father-in-law passed away, and Kate moved in with us. The last time I saw her, other than at the wedding, was when Spencer and I visited her to announce our engagement. So it had been a long time, and my first impression of her was not a very good one. My father-in-law, on the other hand, treated me kindly, and I had a good impression of him. "Spencer, are you sure she is the right woman for you? I'm worried she's going to give you a hard time." I remembered her blatantly speaking her mind. Spencer tried hard to make her accept the marriage, but the way she looked at me was not very nice. We managed to get her approval after some persuasion from her husband and Spencer. I still think she shouldn't have openly made such remarks in front of me. I was worried if we could get along once she moved in with us. I tried to be positive and switched my mind to do my best with her when she and her belongings arrived at the house. I helped her unpack, and she was very kind to Sean, who turned 3 years old while she took care of him. Spencer and I unpacked, and I asked him to take care of the heavy stuff while I organized the small things. The unpacking went smoothly, and there was only the small stuff left for me to do. "This is supposed to go over here. I wonder what kind of education you went through." She commented about a fake plant that could be put anywhere. I put it there to improve the atmosphere of the room, but Kate pointed it out to me. Although displeased, I tried to think she was just particular and moved it to the spot she wanted. She looked after Sean for a little while and started watching TV without offering to help me. I didn't even have time to pay attention to him, but she scolded me to watch him. I had my hands full with him and unpacking, but I couldn't ask Spencer, who was taking a rest after carrying heavy things, to help me out. I finished tidying up with mixed feelings, trying to think that she was feeling unsettled about changing her living environment, pushing away my frustration for her. After that, her criticism continued every day, and one morning, I woke up early to prepare breakfast for everyone and tried to take a rest. The house was messy, and if I had time to rest, she insisted I should clean it up. She never gave me a moment of rest throughout the day, constantly criticizing how I did things. She was hardly ever at home during the daytime, let alone doing anything herself. I was getting mentally strained by such a life, and I decided to talk to Spencer about her. She must be having a hard time since Dad's gone. Take it easy on her, I pleaded. However, he wasn't any help. Even though he knew how she treated me, he didn't intervene. Every night, regardless of my feelings, I found myself lying in bed, hands on my forehead, drifting off to sleep in despair. My 3-year-old son cried at night, unable to bear the fatigue and sleepiness. I couldn't bring myself up, and Spencer rushed to his side. Kate must have woken up by the noise and shook me violently. How are you still sleeping when your son is crying? How can you live with yourself, Spencer? It's a woman's job. She yelled at me for being exhausted and unable to move. I didn't want to make things worse, so I quietly got up and went to scene. I ended up getting no sleep that night. Spencer was off that day, and I was thinking about what to cook for lunch. Kate started preparing, and when she put the meals on the table, one plate was missing. It looks like one portion is missing. I married Spencer, who works hard, and my grandson, of course. There's none for you. Make your own. I was absolutely mortified. I had been wondering if she was bullying me, but it became clear at that point. I had been unaware of it for a long time. I couldn't stand her without thinking that she was just being hard on me to make me a better wife. If I didn't think that way, I would have broken down. I couldn't talk back to her, so I confided in my friend after I dropped off scene at daycare. That's definitely bullying. How are you holding up? I told the details to my best friend from childhood. She listened attentively and showed great concern, and I finally broke down in tears in front of her. I have been fighting against my frustrations and suppressing them at home for so long. She encouraged me, saying that I was doing my best and that I would be okay. I will help you. I will figure something out, she assured me. We parted as we both had things to do at home. Even though we didn't talk for very long, I felt lighter. My friend suggested a couple of things. One was to put a bug in the house and record what was said on a daily basis. I bought a cheap recorder on the way to pick up scene and set it up discreetly at home. In the middle of cleaning, I picked up a piece of paper that had fallen out of a drawer in Kate's room. When I opened it, I saw a personal loan agreement, and the amount was $20,000. I couldn't believe my eyes, but I thought this might be useful and put the paper in my pocket. After a while, Kate returned and Spencer came home just in time for dinner. We sat around the dinner table with the usual complaints from Kate. Oh, by the way, my friend gave me a discount coupon for a one-night stay at the 5-star spa hotel. The fact that she brought up the subject suggested that she wanted to go. Spencer was very much in favor of it, and my son was also excited. I didn't feel particularly enthusiastic, assuming the trip would be a horrible experience for me. However, Kate surprised me with an unexpected invitation. Well, since you're here and always working so hard, you can come along too. I couldn't believe my ears, considering how much she had harassed me. Maybe she meant well, I thought, reluctant to believe she offered with malice. She expressed her desire to book everything the next day. Unable to sleep that night, I sat on the sofa for a long time contemplating the trip. Scene wanted to go too, but it was challenging to take him alone, and my mom couldn't watch him. Reluctantly, I considered Spencer's plea for me to join, even though he turned a blind eye to my suffering caused by his own mother. I don't want to go, Spencer. You don't help me when I'm being mistreated by your mother, I asserted. He couldn't say anything to that, but he pleaded with me to join. So I gave him a condition. Have a look at this. I found it when I was cleaning Kate's room. I showed him the IOU with the $20,000 debt. His face showed disbelief. He couldn't believe his mother had such a debt. "Can we help her pay this off as her son?" he asked, knowing I'd managed our finances. I declined, having no good intentions to help someone who mistreated me. While I understood his feelings as a son, I couldn't accept his plea. "I beg you. I want you to help me with this and the trip only if you accept my conditions," I proposed. The first condition was that he must intervene when Kate mistreated me. The second was to make rules for her, write them down, and post them all over the house. If she couldn't agree, we would kick her out. Spencer agreed, and I asked my friend to post the rules while we were away. We decided to act as usual until after the trip. Spencer and I would drop the bomb then. On the day of the trip, Spencer took everyone's bags, and we were about to leave the house. Kate's bullying started immediately. "You don't need to carry the bags. Let Emily do it." Spencer glanced at me apologetically, and I obeyed, not wanting to cause animosity before what was to come later. The bags were heavy, making it difficult for me to carry them while also taking care of Scene. I suppose I wouldn't have any energy left to enjoy the hotel. We took a bus a little further away and then drove over a mountain road to the hotel. The exterior and interior were beautiful and luxurious. Scene was excited, exploring every corner, and Kate went to check us in at the front desk. Afterward, as I grabbed my bag to go to the room, Kate's words blew me out of the hotel. "Were you planning to stay with us? I only made a reservation for the three of us." I had no idea what she was talking about, and at that moment, it became clear she never intended to let me stay with them from the beginning. Gradually understanding the situation, I was shocked. I inquired, "Where should I sleep then?" To which she indifferently replied, "I don't know, and I don't care. Why don't you just camp out in the wild around there?" She nonchalantly asked me to join, casually suggesting I sleep out in the woods. Something was seriously wrong with her, and I couldn't help but feel enraged. I was on the verge of yelling at her, but she and my family vanished into the hallway with a casual, "I will see you at checkout time, okay?" Stunned, I stood in the lobby for a while before deciding to leave the hotel. I knew there was a catch, but I didn't expect to be forced to camp out. I was on the verge of tears. All I received from Spencer was a message saying, "I'm sorry," and I couldn't even bring myself to reply. It was past noon when we arrived, so I had lunch at a random cafe and found an open field with a good night view. As soon as I arrived at the field, my friend called, asking how the trip was going. I explained what had just happened, and she was furious. She offered to pick me up, but I declined. I was thankful, but I was sure Kate would get what she wanted if I left. I couldn't foresee what she might do to me later. After hanging up, I decided to consult a lawyer just in case. I sent him my evidence, intending to sue her for emotional abuse if she were to be kicked out after the trip. The lawyer assured me that I could file a claim if it was determined that there was no premeditation. I had concrete evidence that should have proven it. After the call, mental and physical exhaustion hit me hard, and I lay down on the fresh grass, ending the day in an open field with a beautiful night view and a gentle breeze. The next morning, I met up with Kate and my family just in time for checkout. Kate immediately criticized, "Emily, did you stay in the woods? I bet you didn't even clean yourself. You're so filthy." Spencer tried to intervene, but she quickly changed the subject. It seemed he must have told her that forcing me out was too much. She bragged happily about how nice the hotel was, and Scene's smile was my only consolation on the way back home. Upon our return, Kate immediately shouted, "What is all this? Don't play with me." There were rules posted all over the house. She must have read some of them because her face turned red, and she became furious. Then Spencer showed her the IOU, and her red face immediately turned pale. Initially attempting to deny it, she eventually confessed to a spree with her late husband's life insurance. When the money ran out, she couldn't stop the habit and borrowed from Spencer. We proceeded as discussed, and Spencer firmly stated, "I can't have someone who has a debt living with us. I would ask you to leave. Of course, I have proof of what you have done to me. I will sue you," I declared, playing the recording for her to listen. As she heard the playback, her face turned as white as a ghost, and she begged me to let her stay. I informed her that she could stay if she agreed to abide by the rules and refrain from aggressive behavior. She eagerly agreed and apologized, saying, "I'm very sorry. Please help me. I beg you." Witnessing her in this state was unexpected, and I felt a sense of satisfaction, thinking it was finally over. My knees buckled, and I fell to the floor. Spencer sat me down in a chair and started yelling at her about the debt. His respect and trust for her had undoubtedly crashed down, and she must have never imagined the day when her son would scold her furiously, to which she frantically apologized. After settling everything, she kept silent and stared at the sky for the rest of the day. The atmosphere in the household changed drastically the next day. When I woke up early to prepare breakfast as usual, Kate immediately made a nasty remark. What differed from usual was the change in Spencer's attitude. He spoke out in a firm tone, saying, "Mom, we just talked about this yesterday." She choked on her words and went to sit on the sofa. Though tempted to laugh at the scene, I held it in and continued preparing breakfast. Spencer felt guilty about not being a protector and couldn't stand strong against Kate, who raised him. I knew in my heart that he was a kind man, and there must have been something on his mind to turn a blind eye. I didn't blame him. Though I needed him on my side, I couldn't hate the man I fell in love with. He apologized to me in tears, and afterward, he started to watch over me, while Kate's attitude improved day by day. She still pointed out some minor things, but I didn't feel any malice from her. I hoped she would continue like this, allowing me to live with ease and maintain a healthy mind. The debt payment was $700 a month, and Spencer and I cooperated to pay it back, as Kate was too old to work. I secured a part-time job, balancing work and home responsibilities. Kate took care of taking my son to and from daycare, doing a commendable job. Despite her bad habit, Spencer managed her finances. Our family changed gradually for the better. Though dealing with a terrible mother-in-law might make some consider divorce, I couldn't bring myself to do that. Fortunately, I found a solution that helped rebuild my family. I felt lucky and grateful for my friend who listened and encouraged me during tough times. Without her, I would have had no one to vent to, possibly leading to a mental breakdown. When remembering the pain I went through, I get teary-eyed but pat my own shoulder, acknowledging that I tried my best to hold my family together, even in moments of depression and lacking motivation to cook and clean. I completed my tasks to ensure everyone could have a decent life, especially my son, and the sense of accomplishment fills my heart. While I may never fully forgive Kate, she will always be my mother-in-law, and I choose to treat her kindly. Several years have passed since then, and my son has grown up, starting preschool. We are almost finished paying off our debts and are considering moving to a new house. Kate has started to help me a little, and my relationship with Spencer has become better than before. We are even thinking of having another child. My family is now stable, and I am content. I will continue to do my best for my family.
My name's Nora Thompson. Tonight, like most nights since arriving in Monte Carlo, I found myself sitting alone at a small cafe on the edge of Casino Square. It's a far cry from the luxurious life I was born into. After graduating from an elite college in the States, all I wanted was a simple break from the world I knew. My father owns a vast empire from hotels to tech firms, but I use my mother's maiden name to keep things grounded and to avoid the spotlight. The evening had cooled when he walked in. Daniel exuded an air of ownership, or at least the confidence that comes from wearing a suit worth more than most people's rent. He pulled out the chair opposite me without asking. "Mind if I sit?" he finally said, though he was already seated. His smile was all charm, probably well rehearsed. "Looks like you're already sitting," I replied, barely glancing up from my coffee. He chuckled, his laugh too smooth. "I'm Daniel, and you are?" "Nora," I said curtly, giving him a quick once-over. Not my usual type, too polished, but admittedly good-looking. "So, Nora, what brings a girl like you to a pricey haunt like this all by yourself?" His tone was teasing, and I wasn't sure if I was amused or annoyed. "Just enjoying my coffee," I answered vaguely. "And you?" I asked. "What's your excuse?" "I could say business, but I'd be lying," he said with a smirk. Tonight, let's just say I'm scouting for something interesting and it looks like I might have found it. I raised an eyebrow. Hope the coffee lives up to your expectations then. Daniel laughed. Something tells me it's already exceeded them. I wasn't here to make friends or find a fling. Look, I'm not one of those girls who falls for lines if that's what you're aiming for. And I'm certainly not interested in whatever game you're playing. Who says I'm playing a game? He asked, his voice lowering slightly. Experience, I replied. You sit down uninvited, start with a line. What, do you expect a phone number or a date? He leaned back, genuinely amused now. You're tough. I like that. Not looking for a number, just conversation. But if it's too much, just say the word, and I'll vanish. I considered him for a moment. Monte Carlo was beautiful but lonely. Maybe a little chat wouldn't hurt. Conversation is fine, but keep it light. We talked for a while. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily. He didn't press for personal details, and I didn't offer any. As the night wore on, I realized I was actually enjoying myself. Daniel wasn't like the usual guys who try to impress me with their wealth or connections. He had an air of someone used to the finer things but not defined by them. Eventually, the evening drew to a close. Well, Daniel, this was unexpectedly pleasant, I said as I stood to leave. Surprised yourself, huh? He asked with a grin. Maybe just a bit. Good night, Daniel. As I walked back to my apartment, his words lingered in my mind. Monte Carlo had indeed turned out to be full of surprises, and perhaps, just perhaps, I had stumbled upon one tonight. After that first encounter with Daniel, the nights in Monte Carlo seemed a bit less solitary. He had a knack for appearing wherever I was, whether I was exploring the local markets or having a late dinner by myself. His persistence wasn't annoying. Surprisingly, it was quite the opposite. Maybe because he wasn't push-shy, he just seemed genuinely interested in being around me. One breezy evening, as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, he walked over with 2 coffees in hand and sat down beside me without a word. Assuming I wanted coffee, I teased, raising an eyebrow. He handed me a cup. If I'm wrong, I'll drink both. Good guess, I said, accepting the coffee. We sat in silence for a bit, the sound of the waves filling the quiet moments. You never told me what you do back in the States. Daniel finally broke the silence. Didn't think it mattered, I shrugged. I work. Right now, I'm just enjoying not working. Fair enough, he chuckled. Everyone's got a story, though, don't you think? Over the next few days, we fell into an easy routine. Daniel showed me parts of Monte Carlo I hadn't explored yet. We talked about everything and nothing. Movies, books, our favorite foods. He loved to argue about the best James Bond actor, staunchly defending Daniel Craig, while I was all about the classics like Sean Connery. One day, as we strolled along the beach, he stopped suddenly and looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. Nora, I know I'm just some guy you met at a cafe, but these past weeks have been, I don't know, different. Better because of you. I stopped too, unsure how to respond. Feelings were not what I planned on dealing with here. Daniel, I like hanging out with you. I do. But this is just a break for me. I'm not looking for complications. He nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. I get it. No pressure. Just know that I'm here, okay? And I think you're pretty amazing. Days turned into weeks, and my time in Monte Carlo was drawing to a close. Daniel and I spent more and more time together. What started as casual walks and talks turned into late-night dinners and early morning breakfasts. It was the last thing I expected, to fall for someone under the Mediterranean stars. Then one evening, he dropped a bombshell. Come back with me, Nora. Work at my company in the States. I know it's sudden, but I think it could be great. The idea was crazy, completely insane. And yet, part of me was tempted by the adventure, by the idea of taking this, whatever it was, and seeing where it could go. Moving back to the States felt like stepping into an alternate universe. Daniel's offer wasn't just a job, it was an invitation into his life. Suddenly, I was living in an ordinary apartment in an ordinary part of town, playing the role of an ordinary girl who'd lucked out. My father, however, had different ideas about ordinary. He showed up unannounced one afternoon just as I was unpacking my last box. His booming laugh filled my small living room as he stood in the doorway, towering and larger than life. Nora, hiding out in plain sight, huh? He chuckled, giving me a hug that almost crushed my ribs. So, tell me about this decision. This guy must be something special for you to up and move like this. His tone was light, but I could tell he was probing, doing his fatherly duty to sniff out any trouble. I sighed and sat down on the couch. His name's Daniel. He's different, Dad. He doesn't know about all this, I said, waving vaguely around to imply the wealth and the complicated strings attached. Dad sat down next to me, his expression serious now. Nora, you know you can't keep that a secret forever. If he's going to be part of your life, he should know who you are. I know, Dad. I want to be sure about him before I complicate things. Thanks for looking out for me, though. He ruffled my hair, like he used to when I was a kid. Always, kiddo. Just remember, if you need anything, I'm just a call away. And I've got eyes everywhere, he added with a wink. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of adjusting to my new job and new life. Daniel was a constant presence, supportive and charming as ever. But there was an edge to him now, a sharpness that came with the responsibilities he carried. One night, over a quiet dinner at my place, Daniel brought up a topic I'd been dreading. Nora, when do you think I'll get to meet your parents? I feel like I'm missing a big part of your life. I paused, the weight of the moment settling over me. Well, my mom passed away a long time ago, and my dad's just a regular trucker. We're not exactly on speaking terms right now. Daniel frowned, a hint of concern crossing his face. I'm sorry to hear that, but whenever you're ready, I'd like to meet him. Family is important. I nodded, appreciating his sentiment, but knowing full well the reality of my father's world, a world I wasn't ready to introduce Daniel to just yet. Life with Daniel moved at a pace I never expected. We were already blending our lives together. My job at his company was going great, and our relationship was deepening. It all seemed like we were gearing up for something big, but I was still taken aback when that big moment actually happened. It was a normal evening. We were at his place, a cozy upscale apartment with views of the city skyline. We had just finished dinner. Nothing fancy, just takeout because neither of us felt like cooking. We were sitting on the couch, a documentary about ocean life playing in the background, the kind you watch but don't really watch. Daniel turned to me, his expression more serious than the situation called for. He took my hand and suddenly, I felt my heart race as Daniel took a deep breath. Nora, he began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything we've been through, and everything I want for our future. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. Yeah? I love you, Nora. I love everything about you, and I can't imagine my life without you. He paused, swallowing hard, his nervousness palpable. That made two of us. I want to be with you always. Will you marry me? Just like that. No kneeling, no ring box, just straightforward and genuine, just like Daniel. I barely hesitated before replying, yes. The word rushed out almost as a relief. Yes, I will. His face lit up with that wide, infectious grin that had won me over from the start. He pulled me into a tight hug, and we spent the rest of the evening excitedly discussing our future, what we wanted and where we saw ourselves. It was thrilling and a bit daunting, but it felt right. The next challenge was telling my dad. I anticipated him being pleased, but his response was lukewarm at best. Nora, you know I want nothing but your happiness, he said, his voice heavy with concern. It was thrilling and a bit daunting, but it felt right. The next challenge was telling my dad. I anticipated him being pleased, but his response was lukewarm at best. Nora, you know I want nothing but your happiness, he said, his voice heavy with concern. But are you sure about this? It's all happening so fast. I'm sure, Dad. He's a great guy. You'll see, I tried to sound more confident than I felt. He sighed. All right, but promise me you'll sign a prenuptial agreement, just to be safe. The word prenuptial didn't scare me. It was just another part of the modern marriage package, especially with someone who had as much to lose as I did, even if Daniel didn't know the full extent of it. Of course, Dad. We'll handle it, I assured him. Good then, and Nora, I won't be at the wedding. I don't want to spoil your story about being a simple girl. Next came the introduction to Daniel's mother. Her reception was icy from the start. During dinner at their family home, she scrutinized me with a look that could freeze the room. Daniel, are you sure about this girl? She doesn't seem like a fit for our family, she remarked bluntly. Daniel tried to smooth things over, but his mother was relentless. A prenuptial agreement is non-negotiable, she insisted. I agreed without hesitation, knowing it would ease some of the tension. Absolutely, I wouldn't have it any other way. Later, we formalized the terms with a lawyer present. Despite these hurdles, our wedding in the Maldives was breathtaking. standing beside Daniel with the ocean whispering behind us and the sand beneath our feet. I felt a surge of hope. It was just us, our love, and a future we were ready to shape together. Despite the rocky start with family expectations, married life began better than I could have hoped. Daniel and I settled into our new house, a beautiful place with more space than we'd ever need. It was supposed to be the start of our perfect life together. I threw myself back into work, determined to prove that I was more than just the boss's wife. My role at the company had always been challenging, but now there was an added layer of expectations. I was not only managing projects but also involved in key decision-making processes. Initially, Daniel seemed proud. He'd introduced me in meetings with a hint of pride in his voice. "This is Nora, my wife and our project lead." But as the months passed and the projects I led brought in significant profits, boosting the company's profile, something in Daniel began to shift. It was subtle at first, a comment here, a slight remark there. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, he brought it up. "Nora, you're doing great at work. Maybe too great," he said, his voice strained. I looked up from my plate, puzzled. "What do you mean, too great? Isn't that good for the company?" "It is," he admitted, pushing his food around on his plate. "But the guys are starting to say it's turning into the Nora show over there." His words stung. "Isn't that a bit unfair? I thought you'd be happy that we're doing well." "I am happy," he said, though his tone was uncertain. "But it's a lot. You know, everyone's always talking about you, about how you handle things. It makes me wonder." The conversation marked the beginning of a series of challenges between Daniel and me. As the business grew, so did the strain in our relationship. Daniel's once supportive demeanor was now changed with resentment. I couldn't comprehend why he was upset. Wasn't he the one who had encouraged me to take on more responsibility in the first place? Things took a turn for the worse when his mother came to stay with us for a few weeks. Her presence brought with it an old-world attitude that I had always managed to avoid. She made offhand remarks about my work, questioning how a wife could be so absent from home. "You're always at the office, Nora. When do you have time to take care of your husband?" she would say. I tried to shrug off her comments, aiming to keep the peace, but her words only deepened the growing rift between Daniel and me. It seemed that no amount of professional success could mend what was slowly unraveling at home. The more I achieved at work, the more our marriage suffered. One evening, Daniel came home with a grim expression. "Nora, I think it's best if you leave the company. We need to focus on our family, and your role there is causing too much tension." "Leave the company? But why? I've been contributing so much," I said, my voice a mix of disbelief and anger. "It's for the best. You can focus on the house, maybe start that garden you've always talked about," he replied dismissively, as if he were deciding on something trivial rather than my career. The next day, I discovered that he had let go of all our household staff. Housekeepers, cooks, gardeners. It was all on me now. "You wanted to be more involved at home. Here's your chance," he said coldly. I wasn't afraid of housework, but the way this was thrust upon me felt wrong. This wasn't the loving, caring man I had married. This was someone else, someone intolerant and controlling. His mother, who was still staying with us, seemed to relish the situation. "It's good for a wife to focus on her home," she would say, smirking slightly whenever Daniel talked about my new role as a full-time housewife. As I adjusted to this unexpected turn in my life, I felt a deep sense of shame. A shame that I hadn't seen this coming. A shame to admit that maybe my father was right about Daniel. When Daniel suggested a trip to Monte Carlo to rekindle what was left of our spark, I was hesitant but hopeful. That hope quickly faded when his mother announced she would join us. "It's been ages since I've traveled," she declared loudly, as if it were a decree that couldn't be opposed. Daniel welcomed her with open arms, never considering my feelings. We rented a small house in Monte Carlo, charming but costly, and it quickly became my prison rather than a retreat. From the start, Daniel and his mother treated the city as their playground. They rented luxurious cars, visited exclusive boutiques, and dined at the finest restaurants, while I was left to manage the household. They demanded home-cooked meals, reducing me to little more than a servant in our holiday home, cooking and cleaning while they enjoyed the city. As days passed, Daniel's mother's comments grew sharper, her tone more venomous. "Really, Nora? Living at someone else's expense must be quite the life," she would sneer, her words a slap disguised in a smirk. Daniel never defended me. Instead, he laughed, his laughter a betrayal that echoed around the cold walls of our temporary home. I felt isolated, the city's sparkle muted by the shadow of their disdain. One evening, we passed a grand old-style hotel. It's the sad reminder of a world of elegance and respect. Daniel's mother, her voice dripping with envy, remarked, "Lucky billionaire Harris. Imagine owning such a hotel, ruling over a palace like that." That night, at a restaurant overlooking the sea, the last vestige of my patience crumbled. As we sat down, she waved the waiter over with an imperious flick of her wrist. "For Nora, the cheapest dish will do. No need to spoil her with extravagances she doesn't deserve," she declared loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear. Daniel's response was a casual chuckle, his agreement signaled not just by his words but also by a dismissive wave of his hand. "Good call, Mom. Let's not go overboard." Humiliation washed over me like the waves crashing on the rocks below. I rose from my chair, the clatter of the sea echoing my turmoil. Facing them both, my voice steadied but louder than I intended. I said, "I will not tolerate this any longer." My hands trembled, but my resolve was firm. "I'm divorcing you, Daniel." The cold air of Monte Carlo felt warm compared to the chill of betrayal as I walked away from the restaurant. Instead of apologizing, Daniel and his mother followed me with insults. As I quickened my pace, my mother-in-law's voice rang out sharply, "Just look at her, a beggar, unworthy of my son." My heart raced, but before I could get far, Daniel caught up with me and yanked my purse from my shoulder, his fingers clenching it tightly. "This is my money, Nora. Go on, get out on all fours if you have to," he said with contempt, yanking the purse away and leaving me stunned on the sidewalk. Beside him, his mother laughed cruelly, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Maybe now you'll learn to beg in Monte Carlo since that's all you're good for." Their laughter echoed down the street, leaving me feeling powerless and alone. But as they hurled their final insults, fate intervened. We were near the grand old-style hotel Daniel's mother had earlier envied. Pointing to the hotel, she sneered, "Maybe they'll let you in as a beggar." At that moment, the hotel's gates opened and a guard appeared, his face lighting up with recognition. "Miss Harris," he called out warmly, walking over with a respectful salute. The shift in the atmosphere was palpable. Daniel and his mother's expressions changed from satisfaction to confusion. The guard smiled broadly. "Your father told us you might come by. Please, this way. The best room is always reserved for you." Daniel's mother paled, her earlier bravado crumbling. "Harris, as in the billionaire Harris," she stammered, her voice faltering. Ignoring them both, I walked towards the guard, my posture straightening. "Thank you, Pierre," I said, my voice calm and collected. Inside, I felt a mix of relief and vindication. Behind me, Daniel's pleas began in a desperate tone. "Nora, please, I didn't mean it." His mother, not to be outdone, shouted past her son, "Perhaps we could come in for a drink at least." I didn't look back. Entering the hotel, the doors closing behind me felt symbolic, shutting out the chaos of my old life. Pierre escorted me to the reception, where the staff greeted me with the respect due to the daughter of their employer. The flight back to the United States was long, giving me ample time to contemplate my next steps. By the time I landed, my resolve had solidified like the city sidewalks, unyielding and steadfast. The following day, I found myself in the office of a reputable lawyer, papers spread out like a battle map. "During your tenure at the company, it appears your husband failed to pay you bonuses owed for the multi-million-dollar deals you closed," the lawyer pointed out, his tone a mix of surprise and indignation. "That sounds about right," I sighed, reflecting on the countless hours I devoted to the company and the success I had driven. "We're suing for $30 million. The courtroom was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the heated glares Daniel shot across the room as he fumbled through his defense. The man I once loved looked pitiful. When the verdict came, awarding me $3 million, Daniel's face crumpled. Outside the courthouse, he made one last plea. "Nora, everyone's laughing at me. I messed up. Can we start over?" His words might have tugged at my heartstrings once, but that time had passed. "You only missed the money, Daniel. Maybe listen less to your mother next time," I said, my voice sharp against the crisp air. I turned and walked away, the sound of my heels on the pavement marking the end of that chapter. Returning home, I faced my father. The air between us was thick with unspoken words until I broke the silence. "Dad, I should have listened to you." He wrapped me in a warm, forgiving hug. "You had to learn on your own. Now you know, and knowing is half the battle." We talked late into the night about life, mistakes, and new beginnings. His advice was a beacon as I navigated my thoughts about the future. Inspired by our conversation, I began laying the groundwork for my next venture. My experience at Daniel's company had not only honed my skills but ignited a passion for the industry I couldn't deny. I decided to open my own investment firm. With my expertise and the substantial settlement, I had the resources to start something meaningful, something mine. Weeks turned into months as I built my business from the ground up. The challenges were daunting, but every setback taught me a lesson, and every success confirmed that I was on the right path. Sitting in my new office, overlooking the bustling streets below, I realized how far I had come, from a disillusioned wife in a loveless marriage to a competent business owner. The journey had been fraught with hurdles, but each one had made me stronger.
Since Michael and Sarah returned for a hometown childbirth, please leave. My mother-in-law stated in a chilly voice. Her eldest son and his wife are due in 3 days. Me leave? I asked, confused and stunned. Yes, we don't need another mother figure anymore. You've been redundant for a while now. Michael and his family will be living here, so make sure you're out by tomorrow, she continued. I knew I was never truly accepted into the family since the day I got married. Treated as a wife, never did I imagine they would tell me to leave. You barren failure, you were allowed to experience raising a child. Be grateful. We have no obligation to support you anymore. It seems like Simon is tired of you too. What's Simon to? I gulped down my saliva. If it's not a conspiracy between my mother-in-law and Michael, then I don't need to stand in ceremony with my husband anymore. Foolish to drive me out, but it was my mother-in-law who ignited this. What happens to this house now is none of my concern. May they face the reality they have ignored squarely. Personally, I'm Anna Thompson, 45 years old, living with my husband and mother-in-law in a popular area close to the station. The access to the city center is superb. When house hunting, my picky husband, recently promoted to a managerial position, insisted on a spacious apartment. The rent was steep, but the space and rooms made it worth the stretch. My husband, Simon, 8 years my senior, a divorce I met through a friend's introduction. Comforted by the enveloping kindness unique to an older man, we decided to get married after 2 years of dating. Even when I told him about my infertility due to past illness, his affection did not waver. Likewise, my feelings remained unchanged when I learned of the circumstances he carried. My husband had a son named Michael from his previous marriage. I'm truly sorry to ask you, who have never been married, to live with my parents and son. I won't make you suffer. I'll ensure you're happy. That was the promise he made to me. To prevent me from feeling suffocated, my husband suggested moving to a spacious apartment where I could have my own room. Michael, turning 10 this year, won't need much care with my mom around. You don't have to push yourself. After his divorce, my husband got help with childcare from his parents at their home. A few years later, Simon's father passed away in an accident, and it seems his mother took over as Michael's caretaker. From the first meeting, Michael wouldn't even make eye contact with me. I thought it might be his shy nature, approaching a difficult age, so I didn't worry. As long as they accepted me as a member of the household, I was content. My mother-in-law was a quiet and refined person. When I visited to formally introduce myself after our engagement, she treated me with such politeness that I thought we would get along fine living together. I'll continue to prepare the meals as I have been. Simon comes home late, so it's okay if we eat at different times, right, Anna? I'll leave the cleaning and laundry to you. All right, let's work well together. After getting married, I switched from a full-time employee at the pharmacy to a part-timer due to the division of household chores. I started work a bit later in the morning, so I wouldn't get home until nearly 8 p.m. Dinner was always ready when I arrived, making me feel good about living together. My mother-in-law and Michael usually had dinner before I got home, so I was always eating alone. Even after getting married, I sometimes felt a sense of, is this it? but I came to accept that this was our family style. From the beginning, my mother-in-law never really liked me and didn't consider me part of the family at all. Michael, the school's activity day is before summer, right? When is it? We're all going to see you. Sometime after getting married, I tried to break the ice with Michael, who still hadn't warmed up to me. No, I mean, as Michael faltered, my mother-in-law interjected, "We'll go there, just Simon and me. Anna, you don't need to worry about it." I misunderstood her words, thinking she was just being considerate. "I can get the day off work. Let's all go together." "You don't need that. You're Simon's wife. And mixed family has always been just Simon and me." I was quite shocked when I brought it up with my husband at night. He said, "Mom's been clinging to Michael. She probably thinks you're trying to take him away. I'll talk to her eventually." I began to join as a mother at the activity day, but Michael and I rarely spent any time together outside of school events. Sometimes I could tell Michael wanted to say something, but my mother-in-law always cut in between us. I later found out that she had been bad-mouthing me to Michael. Anna said she could be happy with Simon if Michael weren't around. She's a terrible person. Dad must be deceived by her too. If a boy in his formative years hears such things, it wouldn't be strange for him to distrust me. It was a sickening story, but at that time, I hadn't imagined that my mother-in-law could do such a thing. After graduating high school, Michael immediately moved in with his girlfriend and left home. As soon as he started college, a year after he started working, he married her without a ceremony. Once Michael moved out, my mother-in-law surprisingly stopped doing housework altogether. Instead, it seemed that picking on me had become her sole entertainment. She stopped cooking, which she used to do before, and now just sits at the dining table waiting for me to come home. Without a moment to sit down, I would stand in the kitchen and prepare dinner. "You're really inefficient. At this rate, it'll take you all night." I was never good at cooking, partly because I had always relied on my mother-in-law to prepare the meals. Whenever I did manage to cook, she would taste each dish and invariably complain, "This tastes awful." "I'm sorry, I'm trying my best." "You're astonishingly tone-deaf when it comes to flavors, Anna." "It's a good thing Michael never had to eat this." How terrible. If she thought so, she might as well make it herself. But it seemed she just wanted to complain to me, not just about the meals, but she started nitpicking everything from the cleaning I never used to do to the laundry. "Why are there so many wrinkles on the laundry? You have to vacuum every nook and cranny. You really can't do anything right. Didn't your family teach you anything?" With that, my mother-in-law sighed while looking at me being belittled. Even about my family, I clenched my fists in frustration. "I don't know how you won over Simon, but I can't see much charm in you as a woman." And she always concluded with the same line, "If you hadn't come, Michael would have never left." I understood that there was a gaping hole in her heart since Michael had left. Maybe it was what they call empty nest syndrome. If taking it out on me made her feel better, that's what I told myself to endure it. But her bullying took on new energy after a certain event. That event was the pregnancy announcement for Michael's wife, Sarah. The joy my mother-in-law exhibited was unlike anything I had seen before. "It's Michael's baby. It's bound to be adorable. Yeah, he'll be my first grandchild." Watching the two of them rejoice, I was happy too. But my mother-in-law's excitement was beyond normal, probably because Michael asked her, "Grandma, can Sarah have our baby at your place?" Sarah's family home is an hour away by plane, and since they have no one else to rely on here, they turn to us for help. Of course, my mother-in-law wouldn't dream of turning down Michael's request. The phone calls from Michael started to become frequent, and her excitement went through the roof. The next day after getting the news, she started preparing enthusiastically. From cleaning out Michael's room to preparing the bedding and making a list of baby items, it was like she had great-grandchild fever. Naturally, I had to get involved too. When I returned from work, "Anna, I vacuumed Michael's room, so you need to wipe the floors and the windows and please wax them too. This weekend we're going to the department store to look at baby cribs." Cleaning and waxing at night was tough, especially after a long day at work. If I even thought about cutting corners, I'd be told to do it over again. Moreover, my mother-in-law started asking for money, and before I knew it, the house was overflowing with baby stuff. Anna, I need you to withdraw some money tomorrow. There are things I want to get ready for the baby again. Isn't it wasteful to prepare so much when Sarah and Michael haven't even arrived? Shouldn't we wait and choose together with them? I had wanted to meet my mother-in-law's requests, but I was troubled by the relentless spending. How can you be so cold? It's Simon's grandchild. Oh, that's right. You're not related to Michael by blood. You don't care, do you? That's not true. Please don't say that. I just thought Sarah might want to pick things out herself. When do you want to choose things for your own child? Perhaps because I was making a valid point, my mother-in-law glared at me sharply. I immediately thought I had gone too far, but it was too late. Without a word, my mother-in-law went back to her room looking upset. I did reflect on it, but I was also shocked to be spoken about in such a way regarding Michael. The next morning, my mother-in-law didn't come out of her room, perhaps still angry. Simon had a 3-day business trip starting that day, so he just called out, "I'm leaving," through her door. Please don't throw cold water on Mom's great-grandchild fever. She hasn't been the same since Michael left. You were worried too, right? I was. But if we spend all our money like this, we'll have nothing left when Michael and Sarah arrive, right? Simon's face immediately turned sour. Are you saying my earnings are too low? That's not what I'm saying at all, Simon just said, "Fine," and left with a look of dissatisfaction. Discussions about money always end up like this. Since I'm the one managing our finances, I can't help but think ahead. Of course, there's a reason for that. We've been married for 13 years. Simon has provided me with a very comfortable life. Your part-time income is for you to enjoy. Simon had always told me so. I saved everything beyond what I needed for myself. Even though it's in my name, I consider it our shared property. But then Simon's company's performance declined, and over the last 5 years, his salary has dropped to 2/3 of what it was when we first got married. While there's uncertainty whether his company will last until his retirement, he doesn't seem to consider changing jobs. For appearances in front of my mother-in-law, my husband couldn't give up his title as a department head. Now I'm the one paying the rent, and he covers the living expenses. We've kept this from my mother-in-law to save my husband's face. That day, I left work a bit early to apologize to my mother-in-law. When I got home, she was already sitting at the dining table waiting for me. I'm sorry about yesterday. I may have gone too far, I admitted, but my mother-in-law remained silent. Instead, she blindsided me with unexpected news. Michael and Sarah are returning for a hometown childbirth. Please vacate, my mother-in-law declared in a chilly tone. The eldest son and his wife were set to arrive in 3 days. Perplexed and stunned, I asked, I have to leave. She affirmed, yes, we don't need another mother figure anymore. You've been redundant for a while. Michael and his family will be living here. Make sure you're out by tomorrow. The realization hit me hard. I had never truly been accepted into the family since the day I got married. I had always been treated as an outsider. The news of Michael's return for the birth made it clear. You barren failure, my mother-in-law continued. You are allowed to experience raising a child. Be grateful. We have no obligation to support you anymore. It seems like Simon is tired of you too. Maybe he's getting along well with a new girlfriend by now. Shocked, I gulped down my saliva, contemplating the possibility of my relationship with my husband growing distant. Could this be a trap I fell into, thinking my husband would never? I remembered that, up until a year ago, he never had overnight business trips. All right, I'll eat out tonight, I said, grabbing my bag and leaving the house to walk aimlessly. I needed to calm my severely shaken heart. Worried about my husband, I tried calling his cell phone despite my mother-in-law's words. I still wanted to talk to him, but he didn't answer, no matter how many times I rang. I dialed his office, only to learn that he had taken a couple of days off. My mother-in-law's words began to ring more true. Could he really be on a trip with another woman? Dark thoughts crowded my mind, and I found myself overwhelmed with emotion, tears streaming down my face. Staggering along, I noticed the tavern behind the station, a place we used to frequent when we first moved here. It's still here, I thought as I entered. Welcome. The tavern owner's expression clouded briefly upon seeing me. Then he nodded in recognition. Hey, long time no see. It's been about 8 years. I used to come here a lot with my husband, I said. Yes, it's been a while. I remember you, he replied. I couldn't help but smile, feeling a sense of relief. Can I get a beer and a mixed plate of grilled chicken, please? I asked. The owner, a man of few words as always, nodded. As I sipped the cold beer and savored the grilled chicken, I took out my cell phone, and the screensaver lit up with a photo of us when Michael turned 18. Looking sharp in the slim suit we had picked out together, I wished for us to be closer as a family. The beer washed down my throat, taking the day's fatigue with it. Could I really move out tomorrow? Contemplating the next steps, I searched for moving companies, finding one for the job the next day. I also looked up junk buyers and saved 2 companies in my favorites. Changing the screensaver on my phone seemed to clear my head completely. The beer and grilled chicken tasted exceptional. I decided to think about everything once I got home. Walking away from the tavern, I was called from behind. A young waitress from the tavern was running towards me. Excuse me, are you Mrs. Thompson? I noticed the screensaver on your phone, she said. Confirming my identity, she dropped a bombshell. My husband was having an affair with one of their employees. We exchanged contact information, and she promised to keep me informed. My mother-in-law's words appeared to be true. Instead of sadness, a fierce anger welled up within me. It was time to confront this head-on. Booking an appointment with a moving company, I resolved to move out that day. If it wasn't a conspiracy, and my mother-in-law and Michael were truly involved, then I no longer needed to honor my husband. Returning home, I packed my belongings until midnight. Without hesitation, the moving company arrived on time, and I made it clear that I was leaving. As requested, they took everything I had bought, erasing every trace of my presence. My mother-in-law panicked, but I was resolute. I'm taking everything I bought. You can start a completely new life tomorrow, I declared, suppressing a laugh. Ignoring her protests, I proceeded to have everything taken out. My mother-in-law complained loudly to the movers, but there was nothing she could do. The only items left in the house were piles of baby gear and her old dresser from before the marriage. Well then, I bid you farewell. There should be no trace of me left, so enjoy your life with Simon, Michael, and his family, I declared, leaving her sitting there stunned. Placing the keys on the table, I exited the room. The movers held onto my things for a while, and I decided to stay with a single colleague for some time. Feeling a sense of completion, I slept soundly that night. A week later, I finally heard from my husband. I wondered if he was scheming with that other woman. While my husband was dragging his feet, I received a call from the young woman at the tavern. Got a good shot, so I'll send it to you. In the photo, my husband was chatting up a not-so-young woman at the tavern. Maybe out of a sense of justice, the young woman must have followed them after they closed. There was also a photo attached of the two entering a hotel. Even in such times, the cheating continues, I thought, and any last bit of affection I had for my husband dissipated. I asked for the woman's name and had her address looked up. The next day, armed with all the evidence of the affair, my husband called. Anna, where are you? Michael and his family are here too. Aren't you going to come home soon? No, I'm not coming back. Your mom told me to leave. I'm done here. Michael and his family are going to live with you now, right? I knew it. Michael and his family were out of money and looking to crash at our place. I heard that after graduating from a vocational school, they've been hopping from job to job, and now they're working part-time. No. I want you back, Anna. I went to the pharmacy, and they said you're off for a bit. Got a place to crash. Yeah, I'm fine. So don't worry about me. Your mom and Michael didn't like me, right? I reckon they're happy to have the place to themselves without me around. My snide comment left my husband speechless. He knew his mother and Michael never accepted me as family, but pretended not to see it. Well, all right. I have something to say, so I'll come back there once, my husband replied with a relieved please in his voice. Days later, I returned to the house for the first time in a long while. Some new pieces of furniture and appliances were inside. When Michael and Sarah saw me, they just nodded from their seats on the sofa without getting up. As I took a seat, my mother-in-law glared at me with a scary look on her face. The atmosphere was tense, and just as I thought to get things done and leave quickly, Michael spoke up. What are you doing here? You took everything from the house. What kind of monster does that? Dad's been supporting you, and you've had it easy. I sighed. I took everything because I paid for it. I wanted to remove all traces of me, just as you wanted, right? That's crazy, right? There's no way you could afford all that just working part-time at the pharmacy, my husband said. When I glanced at him, he started talking as if he'd resigned himself. We've been getting by on what Anna and I both make for a little while now. Then the stuff you took should be both yours. Instead of my speechless husband, I decided to speak up. Simon's company has been doing poorly, and his salary plummeted. That's why, for the past 5 years, I've been covering what's missing. But that wasn't enough, and now I'm the one paying our rent. My mother-in-law looked at my husband with surprise. I'm not just a part-timer, I'm a part-time pharmacist, and the pay is quite good. I'm making more than Simon now. At my words, my husband awkwardly looked away. My mother-in-law's eyes were frantically shifting between my husband and me. From now on, Michael, you'll be paying the rent. You're going to live here, right? After all the help your gran was given, it's time for you to take care of her. Michael looked at me with a shocked expression. When I dropped the news suddenly, rent? How much is it? He asked. It's $5,600. Good luck, since it seems my role as a mother is over. I don't have an obligation to take care of you anymore. Pull yourself together. You're going to be a father soon. Michael murmured with a shake of his head, That's impossible. It was Sarah who raised her voice upon hearing this. Wait, $5,600? Weren't we supposed to live here for free, covering rent and living expenses? I almost burst out laughing. Don't worry, Sarah. You can move to a cheaper place. Simon still makes a decent salary. Hearing this, Sarah's face relaxed a bit. Oh, since I'll be leaving you, Simon, life might still get tough with your mistress, huh? At that, Sarah finally broke down in tears. It was my husband who panicked. What? What are you talking about? Sarah replied, Oh, your mother told me about the new woman. I guess it's time to end my role as a wife, too. My husband must think there's no evidence. Indeed, it hasn't even been 10 days since I left the house. Wouldn't that hurt Mary if she heard you? Well, I'll get in touch about that later. At the mention of Mary's name, my husband jolted, realizing that I knew everything. He held his head inside. This is not the atmosphere to write a divorce paper. Well then, I'll be going now. Please talk to me further through a lawyer. Neither my husband Simon nor Michael said anything more, staying silent as I grabbed my bag and stood up. My mother-in-law stood up simultaneously, slamming her hands on the table. She yelled with a voice too strong for an elderly woman. What the hell? It's all your fault our home is in shambles. I was instantly irritated. It was you who told me to leave. It was you who said Simon had another woman. And you interfered with my relationship with Michael. Everything was you. I felt a surge of heat in my chest. I regretted not being more assertive with my relationship with Michael, not holding back because of my mother-in-law. Michael has nothing to do with this. It's time for you to step up, Simon. He's going through a hard time. You should support him as his wife, take responsibility as a family member. What is she even talking about? If she hadn't called Michael back home, if she hadn't hinted at Simon's affair, I would still happily support Simon and this home I always believed in and supported. Simon, where are you? Michael, why are you still here? It's all her fault. My mother-in-law's lips tightened into a line, and she was trembling. I slipped past the silent mother-in-law and quickly left the room. Afterward, Simon agreed to the divorce rather easily. It seems my determination was strong, and he couldn't counter the evidence of the affair. Shortly after, it seemed like they started the process of moving out of the apartment. In the end, Michael and Sarah went back to their apartment and never lived with the mother-in-law. Simon seems to be considering remarriage, but Mary was furious over the alimony and his request for her to live with his mother. I've heard they're considering whether to place my mother-in-law in a care facility. After all the love she poured into her son and grandson, it's somewhat sad to think they're ready to abandon her now. Perhaps she's served her purpose too. If my mother-in-law had said nothing back then, and it had just been a simple trip home for childbirth, maybe we would still be living together. After the divorce, Michael sent me an apology letter. He wrote about how, as a child, he really wanted to be more spoiled, how he couldn't talk to me because his grandma disliked it, and how happy he was when I attended school events. Maybe I should have reached out more. Perhaps then, we could have built a different relationship. Even though our relationship has ended, I quietly pray for Michael's happiness in life. I've returned to work as a pharmacist and quickly rented an apartment close to my workplace. I don't feel good about keeping the furniture and appliances I took with me, so I had them all picked up and disposed of by a junk removal service. Life without my mother-in-law's harassment is peaceful and comfortable. For a while, I want to live for my own happiness, not someone else's.